Have you ever stood amid the ruins of an ancient city, your fingers brushing against weathered stone, and felt the ghost of a story waiting to be told? There's something uniquely compelling about those places history has forgotten, those kingdoms that once pulsed with life, ambition, and grandeur, only to vanish from the map and live on only in whispers, legends, and dreams. These lost civilizations capture our imagination precisely because they remain just out of reach, shrouded in mystery, and inviting us to wonder what really happened within their walls. Today, we're embarking on a journey to explore 25 of these legendary Lost Kingdoms realms that have disappeared from recorded history but endure powerfully in myth, folklore, and human curiosity. From sunken cities swallowed by the sea to empires that faded into desert sands, each one tells a story not just of rise and fall, but of the enduring human desire to make sense of our past. And more than that, they remind us how fragile even the greatest civilizations can be, and how the stories we tell about them keep their memory alive long after their rulers, their people, and their monuments are gone. This isn't just a tour through dusty history books or a simple list of names and dates. It's an adventure into the very heart of mystery itself, into places where fact and legend blur together, where archaeologists and storytellers alike have searched for answers. You'll discover kingdoms that inspired some of humanity's greatest tales, places like El Dorado, Atlantis, and Shangri-La, but also lesser-known realms whose disappearances are every bit as haunting. So settle in, open your imagination, and join me as we travel across time and terrain, piecing together the puzzles of these 25 lost kingdoms and uncovering why, even in their absence, they continue to speak to us. Our journey into these vanished worlds begins with perhaps the most iconic lost kingdom of all, Atlantis. The very name conjures images of gleaming spires, advanced technology, and a tragic, watery end. But where did this story originate? We must travel back to ancient Athens, to the dialogues of the philosopher Plato, around 360 BC. In his works Timaeus and Critias, Plato introduced Atlantis not as a myth, but as a historical account passed down through generations. He describes it as a powerful island kingdom located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it in the vast, unknown expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. According to his narrative, Atlantis was a marvel of engineering and culture, a circular series of islands with grand canals and a magnificent central citadel built from exotic stones like red, white, and black rock. Its people possessed technology that seemed almost magical for its time and had established a formidable naval empire that sought to conquer the ancient Mediterranean. Their ambition was their downfall. Plato tells us that the Atlanteans became morally corrupt, arrogant from their own power and wealth. As divine punishment, the island was struck by catastrophic earthquakes and floods in a single, terrible day and night, vanishing beneath the waves forever. For Plato, this wasn't just a thrilling story. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations when they abandon virtue. The fascinating puzzle is that while many scholars believe Plato invented Atlantis to serve his philosophical arguments, his incredibly detailed description has fueled 24 centuries of searching. Modern theories about its possible real-world inspirations are as diverse as they are compelling. Some point to the Minoan civilization on the island of Thera, modern Santorini, which was largely destroyed by a colossal volcanic eruption around 1600 BC. An event so massive it likely inspired global flood myths. Others suggest the rich Bronze Age culture of Tartessos in southern Spain, which mysteriously disappeared. There are even more speculative links to the Sargasso Sea or the Azores. Each theory attempts to find a kernel of truth in Plato's story, a real event so traumatic its memory was warped by time into the legend we know today. But if Atlantis represents a kingdom lost to the sea, our next legend is one lost to an insatiable greed for gold. We travel now from the misty Atlantic to the steamy jungles of South America to the story of El Dorado. This name, which translates to the Golden One, did not originally refer to a place at all, but to a person, a living, breathing ruler whose coronation ritual was so breathtakingly lavish that it would warp into one of history's most potent and destructive myths. The origins lie with the Muisca people, a sophisticated confederation of tribes inhabiting the highlands of what is now Colombia. When a new Zipa, or chief, was to ascend to power, his inauguration involved an elaborate ceremony at Lake Guatavita, a deep, circular lake formed in an ancient meteor crater. The new ruler, covered from head to toe in a sticky resin and then dusted with a fine layer of gold powder, would appear as a shimmering, golden man, a living sun god. He would then board a ceremonial raft piled high with gold and emeralds, and as he was paddled to the center of the sacred lake, his attendants would cast these priceless offerings into the dark waters as a sacrifice to the gods. This was the real El Dorado, not a city, but a man, and a ritual of immense spiritual significance. When Spanish conquistadors, fresh from the plunder of the Aztec and Inca empires, heard fragments of this story from captured natives, their imaginations and their avarice ignited. They twisted the tale of a single golden man into a vision of an entire city paved with gold, a place called Manoa where treasure lay scattered in the streets. This fantasy launched a relentless and bloody pursuit that would span centuries. Figures like Gonzalo Pizarro and Francisco de Orellana led massive, grueling expeditions through some of the most impenetrable rainforest on Earth, driven by the promise of unimaginable wealth. Their failures were epic. Men died by the thousands from disease, starvation, snake bites, and in conflicts with indigenous tribes. Orellana's journey, in fact, led to him becoming the first European to navigate the entire length of the Amazon River, a monumental feat of exploration born not from scientific curiosity, but from a desperate, gold-fueled search for a mirage. The legend proved so malleable and so enduring that it constantly shifted location, always just beyond the next mountain range or deep within the next unexplored valley, drawing wave after wave of explorers to their ruin. Even in the modern era, the hunt has persisted. In the 1980s, a would-be conquistador named Tony Halleck even used a miniature submarine to scour the depths of Lake Guatavita, finding only a few pre-Columbian artifacts. The true legacy of El Dorado is not one of discovery, but of delusion, a powerful cautionary tale about how the desire for wealth can distort reality, turning a sacred cultural practice into a phantom that consumed countless lives. The real gold was never in a hidden city. It was in the sophisticated metalworking traditions of the Muisca people, whose beautiful tunjos or votive figures and other artifacts are the true treasures, telling a far richer story than any myth. From the golden mirage of El Dorado, we now journey high into the frozen, thin-aired peaks of the Himalayas in search of a kingdom not of material wealth but of spiritual perfection, the mythical valley of Shangri-La. Unlike Atlantis or El Dorado, whose legends are centuries old, Shangri-La is a surprisingly modern invention, born from the typewriter of an English novelist named James Hilton. His 1933 novel, Lost Horizon, introduced the world to a hidden Tibetan monastery called Shangri-La, a secluded paradise where time seemed to stand still. In Hilton's story, a plane crash strands a group of Western travelers in this mysterious valley, where they discover a lamasery filled with ancient art and books, inhabited by people who aged incredibly slowly and lived in a state of perpetual peace and harmony, shielded from the wars and strife of the outside world. The novel was a phenomenal success, capturing the global imagination during the anxious interwar period and offering a desperately needed vision of a sheltered utopia. Yet, while the name Shangri-La was Hilton's creation, the concept was powerfully borrowed from a much older and deeply rooted Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the legend of Shambhala. This is where fiction meets ancient belief. In Buddhist texts, Shambhala is a hidden kingdom, a pure land nestled somewhere amidst the snow-capped Himalayas. It is not a place of eternal youth, but a society of unparalleled wisdom and compassion, a sanctuary where the Buddhist teachings are preserved in their most perfect form. Prophecies state that when the world is overcome by greed and darkness, a great king will emerge from Shambhala to defeat the forces of ignorance and usher in a golden age. This spiritual fortress, accessible only to those with pure karma, became the undeniable blueprint for Hilton's literary paradise. The author cleverly secularized and westernized this profound spiritual concept, transforming a celestial realm of enlightenment into an earthly, accessible haven from modern anxiety. The name itself, Shangri-La, resonated so perfectly that it entered our common vocabulary as a synonym for any hidden paradise. This fusion of fiction and ancient belief sparked a very real quest. Inspired by Hilton's vivid descriptions, explorers and scholars have spent decades trying to pin Shangri-La to the map, much like the search for Atlantis. The most famous candidate is the breathtakingly beautiful Jade Dragon Snow Mountain region in China's Yunnan province. In 2001, the county of Zhongdian officially renamed itself Shangri-La City to capitalize on the association, and with its stunning gorges, Tibetan monasteries, and diverse cultures, it certainly feels like a world apart. Other theories point to the hidden valleys of Bhutan, remote parts of Nepal like the Mustang region, or the Hunza Valley in Pakistan, where the clean air and rugged isolation were once believed to contribute to extraordinary longevity among its inhabitants. The true power of Shangri-La, however, lies not in its potential geographic location, but in its enduring appeal as an ideal. It represents a universal human longing for a sanctuary, a place untouched by time and conflict where one can find peace, wisdom, and a connection to something eternal. It is a myth that gives form to our deepest hope that somewhere, perhaps just beyond the next mountain pass, a perfect world awaits. But if the Himalayas offer a myth of salvation, the churning, grey waters of the Atlantic off the tip of Cornwall tell a far more tragic and tempestuous tale. We leave the mountain peaks for a rugged coastline battered by ocean storms, to the realm of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and to the legendary lost land of Lyonesse. In the grand tapestry of Arthurian legend, Lyonesse is famed as the homeland of the tragic hero Sir Tristan, a land of towering castles and fair cities, a place of great beauty and chivalric romance. The stories say it was connected to the mainland, a fertile plain that stretched far out into what is now the sea. But its glory was not to last. According to the lore, a single, monstrous storm surged in from the ocean, accompanied by a tremendous earthquake. In one terrible night, the waves consumed the entire kingdom, drowning its fields, forests, and people, leaving only the highest peaks as a scattered chain of islands, the Isles of Scilly we know today. It's a powerful narrative of sudden, apocalyptic loss, a Celtic Atlantis that speaks to the deep-seated fear of the sea's awesome and unpredictable power. What makes Lyonesse so compelling, however, is that unlike the purely philosophical origins of Atlantis, its legend appears to be rooted in a tangible, observable geological truth. The stretch of sea between the westernmost point of Cornwall, Land's End, and the Isles of Scilly is notoriously shallow and treacherous for ships, a place of hidden reefs and shifting sands known as the Seven Stones Reef. For centuries, Cornish fishermen have told stories of pulling up pieces of petrified wood and even the antlers of deer in their nets from these waters. They spoke of the forest beneath the waves, and they were not merely spinning sailors' yarns. Modern archaeology and geology have confirmed their tales. Across parts of Mounts Bay near Penzance and again out towards the Scillies, scientists have identified the remnants of submerged prehistoric forests visible at extremely low tides. These are the stumps of oak, pine, and hazel trees preserved in the peat beds they once grew in, now lying silently under the ocean swell. radiocarbon dating places these forests as being above water just 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, a time when sea levels were significantly lower and a great plain would indeed have connected the mainland to the islands. This wasn't a single catastrophic event like the one described in the myth, but a much slower, relentless process of coastal erosion and rising seas that occurred over millennia. Yet, for the people living in Cornwall centuries later, witnessing these ancient tree stumps emerge briefly from the stormy waters, the evidence was clear: a great land had been lost to the sea. The legend of Lyonesse became the cultural explanation for this physical evidence, a story woven to make sense of the sunken world they could literally see and touch. It transformed a slow, natural process into a dramatic, memorable tragedy, forever linking the landscape to the beloved tales of Arthur and his knights. The story gave a name, a history, and a human face to the geological forces that had shaped their coastline, serving as a permanent, poetic warning of the ocean's enduring power to reclaim what was once ours. Far to the east of Lyonesse, across the Celtic Sea along the coast of Brittany in France, another legend whispers of a kingdom drowned by its own sins, the haunting, tragic tale of the City of Ys. This story is not one of geological change, but of moral failing, a divine punishment rendered in waves and wind. It begins with a king named Gradlon the Great, who ruled in the 5th century and loved his only daughter, Dahat, more than anything in the world. To protect her from the perils of the world and to grant her every luxury her heart desired, he used his immense wealth and power to build the most spectacular city ever conceived, but he built it in the most perilous of places, on land that lay below the level of the sea. The City of Ys, or Cur is in the Breton language, was a marvel of engineering and opulence. Its walls were made of gleaming glass and its streets paved with gold and precious stones. Grand palaces and bustling markets stood where there should only have been ocean. To keep that very ocean at bay, King Gradlon ordered the construction of an immense protective dike that completely encircled the city, with a single, massive bronze gate that was the only entrance from the sea. The key to this mighty gate was a thing of magic and absolute authority. King Gradlon kept the only key on a chain around his own neck, and every evening without fail, it was his solemn duty to personally lock the gate against the high tide, securing the city for the night. Within this artificial paradise, life was a continuous festival, but the city's safety, and indeed its very soul, was entirely dependent on that one lock and the king's unwavering discipline. His daughter, the Princess Dahat, was raised in this gilded cage of her father's making. She was beautiful, headstrong, and utterly bored with her sequestered existence. The legends depict her as a complex figure, sometimes a spoiled princess, other times a pagan seductress influenced by malevolent forces, but always as a soul yearning for reckless freedom. She craved the thrilling chaos of the world outside the walls her father had built. She held lavish, decadent parties that lasted through the night, and it is said she would take a new lover each evening, only to have him murdered by her guards by morning to protect her secrets. The city, under her influence, descended into a state of constant sin and debauchery, turning its back on the Christian God that Gradlon followed. The king, blinded by his love for his daughter, refused to see the corruption festering at the heart of his magnificent creation. He ignored the warnings of his own court priest, the saintly Corentin, who prophesied that such wickedness would call down a terrible judgment. That judgment arrived one evening in the form of a terrifying storm. As the wind howled and the waves rose to monstrous heights, a mysterious knight clad all in red appeared at the bronze gate. Some versions of the tale say he was Dahat's latest paramour, others that he was the devil himself, sent to orchestrate the city's doom. Charmed by this stranger and intoxicated by the storm's wild energy, Dahat begged her father for the key, pleading to see the magnificent waves up close. In a moment of catastrophic weakness, his love for her overcoming his duty, Gradlon relented. the moment Dahat seized the key and threw open the massive gate, the sea did not merely trickle in, it erupted. A colossal, vengeful wave surged through the opening, shattering the dike and consuming the entire city in a torrent of salt and fury. King Gradlon, awakened to the horror, snatched his daughter onto his horse and fled, galloping madly through the drowning streets as the water rose around them. As they fled, Saint Corentin's voice echoed over the tempest, crying out that Gradlon must cast the demon behind him into the sea if he wished to survive. The king realized the demon was his own daughter clinging to his back. With a heart shattered by grief and duty, he obeyed the divine command and pushed Dahat into the raging waters. Immediately, the waves calmed around him, allowing him alone to escape as the last witness to Ys's splendor and its sin. Today, the Bay of Douarnenez is said to cover the spot where the glorious city once stood. On quiet, foggy mornings, local fishermen claim to see the ghostly outlines of stone buildings and grand spires shimmering beneath the water's surface. And most haunting of all, they say that when a storm gathers over the bay, you can still hear the mournful, drowned bells of the city's churches tolling from the deep, a perpetual lament for the kingdom lost to a single moment of weakness. The legend of Ys endures as one of the most poignant and morally complex of all the sunken city myths, a powerful allegory about the dangers of excessive love, the consequences of neglecting duty, and the fragile barriers we erect between civilization and the chaos of nature. But the legend of Ys, for all its haunting tragedy, is ultimately a story of divine punishment and a world lost beneath the waves. Our next lost kingdom offers a very different kind of mystery, one not of destruction but of transition and healing. We travel now from the stormy coasts of Brittany back to the misty landscapes of Arthurian Britain, to a place that exists not in the realm of historical geography, but in the liminal space between myth and memory, the mystical island of Avalon. Following the cataclysmic final battle of Camlan, where King Arthur received a mortal wound battling his treacherous nephew Mordred, the legends tell us he did not simply die and fade from the world. Instead, he was carried away from the field of slaughter by a group of mysterious, sorrowful women, most notably his sister, the enchantress Morgan Le Fay. Their destination was Avalon, a hidden and magical island where time itself seemed to hold its breath. This was not a place for mortal kings to perish, but a sanctuary for heroes to be healed. The very name, derived from the Old Welsh word Avalon, meaning apple, gives us the first clue to its nature, the Isle of Apples. In Celtic mythology, the apple was a powerful symbol of immortality, healing, and the otherworld. Its fruit was considered a source of supernatural sustenance, and its blossoms were thought to perfume the air of the lands of the gods. Avalon, then, was conceived as an orchard of eternal life, a paradise where Arthur's grievous wounds could be tended to with magic and wisdom beyond that of any earthly physician. The most enduring image, penned by the medieval writer Geoffrey of Monmouth, is of Arthur being borne across the water on a funeral barge, his fate uncertain, leaving behind the indelible promise that he would one day return in his nation's darkest hour, the legendary Rex Quandam, Rex Futurus, the once and future king. This potent myth, however, did not remain entirely in the realm of fantasy. In the late 12th century, a remarkable event seemingly anchored the story of Avalon to a very real place. In the year 1191, monks at Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset made a stunning announcement. They had discovered the graves of King Arthur and his queen Guinevere. According to their account, prompted by a cryptic hint from King Henry II, they dug between two ancient pyramids in the Abbey cemetery and, at a great depth, struck a massive hollowed-out log. Inside were the enormous bones of a man with a skull showing a terrible head wound and the smaller skeleton of a woman. A lead cross was found placed atop the burial, inscribed with the words, Hic jacet sepultus inclitus Rex Arthurus in Insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the famous King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. For the monks, this was irrefutable proof. they had physically found the mythical king, and in doing so, they had identified their own home, Glastonbury, with the mystical Isle of Avalon. The connection was geographically ingenious. In the early medieval period, before the surrounding swamps were drained, Glastonbury Tor would not have been a hill rising from a plain, but a striking, solitary island emerging from a vast, watery landscape known as the Summerlands. To travelers approaching across the flooded marshes, the Tor would have appeared exactly as an island, its lone peak often shrouded in mist, creating an aura of profound mystery and isolation. Furthermore, the abbey was historically famous for its cultivation of apple orchards, with a specific variety of cider apple even named the Glastonbury apple. The landscape itself seemed to echo the mythological descriptions. The discovery served multiple purposes. It brought immense pilgrimage wealth and prestige to the abbey, and it also served the political aims of the Plantagenet monarchy by effectively proving, to their Welsh rivals who still believed in Arthur's return, that the great Celtic hero was well and truly dead and buried in English ground. While most modern historians view the grave discovery as a clever, politically motivated forgery, the symbolic link between Glastonbury and Avalon has become inseparable in the cultural imagination. The Tor, with its ancient terraced slopes and the ruined tower of St. Michael atop its summit, continues to draw thousands who feel its powerful, otherworldly energy. It stands as a permanent testament to how a place can become so saturated with story that it transcends its physical form, transforming into a gateway between our world and the world of myth. Avalon, therefore, is more than a lost kingdom. It represents the ultimate boundary, not between land and sea, but between life and death, history and legend, waiting and hope. It is the quiet, mist-shrouded promise that some heroes are never truly gone. From the mystical mists of Avalon, we now journey to a lost world born not from ancient poetry, but from a very modern puzzle, the enigma of lemur fossils. Our next kingdom emerged directly from the scientific debates of the 19th century, a hypothetical continent constructed to solve a biological riddle, only to escape the bounds of science and become a cornerstone of occult mythology. This is the story of Lemuria. In the 1860s, a fascinating problem captivated zoologists and geologists. Fossils of lemurs, those wide-eyed primates native to Madagascar, were being discovered in India and as far away as Malaysia, but they were entirely absent from the intervening lands of Africa and the Middle East. This distribution made no sense. How could these small, tree-dwelling creatures have crossed such vast and inhospitable oceans? The prevailing scientific theory of the time had no answer. The concept of continental drift was still decades away from being proposed, let alone accepted. Into this intellectual void stepped the British zoologist Philip Sclater. In 1864, he published a paper proposing a radical solution. What if a vast land bridge, now submerged, had once connected Madagascar to the Indian subcontinent? He named this lost continent Lemuria, after the furry little primates whose travel plans it was meant to explain. For Sclater and his colleagues, this was a perfectly rational, evidence-based hypothesis. It was a tool to explain a seemingly impossible pattern of animal migration, and for a time it was considered a legitimate, if unproven, scientific theory. But a fascinating transformation was about to occur. The idea of a sunken Pacific continent, Atlantis, was already deeply embedded in the public imagination. Lemuria, a newly minted scientific concept, provided a tantalizing blank slate, a fresh canvas upon which all manner of mystical and spiritual dreams could be painted. No one did more to propel Lemuria into the realm of the occult than the formidable and enigmatic Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the co-founder of the Theosophical Society. In her massive and influential 1888 work, The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky wove Lemuria into an elaborate cosmology of human spiritual evolution. She described it not as a simple land bridge for lemurs, but as the home of the third root race of humanity, Her Lemurians were bizarre, egg-laying giants with a third eye in the back of their heads, possessing ethereal, gelatinous bodies and communicating through telepathy. In her narrative, this race eventually degenerated and interbred with beasts, creating the apes, and their continent met a cataclysmic end through volcanic fire, sinking beneath the waves of what is now the Indian and Pacific Oceans. For Blavatsky, Lemuria was a necessary precursor to Atlantis, a stage in a grand, divine plan of racial and spiritual cycles. This theosophical reinterpretation opened the floodgates. Lemuria was eagerly adopted by a host of other esoteric writers, mystics, and later, the burgeoning New Age movement. It became a Pacific paradise, a utopian society of advanced spiritual beings living in harmony with nature. Some traditions placed it off the coast of California, linking it to the channelings of the psychic Edgar Cayce or the myths of the Native American tribes of Mount Shasta, where stories persist even today of mysterious, robed Lemurians living in a hidden city inside the mountain. This version of Lemuria stands in stark contrast to its dry, scientific origins. It is no longer a land bridge but a spiritual homeland, a symbol of a lost golden age of peace and enlightenment. The decisive blow to the original scientific hypothesis, however, came from the very field that initially sought to explain it, geology. The 20th century development of the theory of plate tectonics provided the real answer to Philip Sclater's lemur fossil mystery. We now know that India, Madagascar, and Antarctica were once all part of the same supercontinent, Gondwana. Over millions of years, the Indian plate broke away and drifted northward, colliding with Asia to form the Himalayas. The lemurs and many other species were simply passengers on these giant, drifting continental rafts. Their fossil distribution wasn't caused by a land bridge that sank, it was caused by continents that moved. This conclusive evidence completely invalidated the need for a sunken Lemurian continent from a geological standpoint, and yet the myth persists with incredible vitality. Why does a concept debunked by modern science continue to capture our imagination? Lemuria's enduring appeal lies in its unique origin story. Unlike Atlantis or Shangri-La, which sprang from ancient legend, Lemuria was born from a scientific paper. This gives it a peculiar kind of credibility in the eyes of its believers, a sense that it must have some basis in fact. It represents the powerful human tendency to fill the gaps in our knowledge with stories, and when science moves on, those stories often remain, evolving to fulfill a spiritual or metaphysical need. Lemuria is the ultimate chameleon of lost kingdoms, transforming from a zoological hypothesis into a spiritual beacon, proving that an idea, once unleashed, can take on a life of its own, forever sailing the seas of myth long after its original map has been declared obsolete. While the legend of Lemuria was born from a scientific puzzle and then transformed by mysticism, our next lost kingdom emerged from a very different source: the fervent imagination of a 19th century adventurer and his determined, if misguided, quest to rewrite human history. We travel now from the Indian Ocean to the vast expanse of the Pacific, to the sunken continent of Mu, a story that began with a mistranslation and grew into a global epic. The saga starts not with a scholar, but with a flamboyant figure named Augustus Le Plongeon, a British-American antiquarian and pioneering photographer who spent years excavating Mayan ruins in the Yucatan Peninsula in the late 1800s. Le Plongeon was a man possessed by a grand, unifying theory. He became convinced that the ancient Maya were the founders of all world civilization and that their wisdom had been carried across the oceans. His key piece of evidence was a mistranslation of a then undeciphered Maya codex. He believed he had found references to a lost land called Mu, which had been destroyed by a volcanic catastrophe. In his narrative, survivors from Mu, specifically a Queen Mu and her brother Prince Ko, fled to Egypt to found that civilization, while others went to Asia. Le Plongeon's theories were immediately and thoroughly dismissed by the academic establishment of his day, who rightly pointed out his fanciful and erroneous interpretations of Maya hieroglyphs. But the seed of the idea had been planted. It fell to a retired British colonial officer and avid writer named James Churchward to take that seed and cultivate it into a sprawling global myth. In a series of popular books starting with The Lost Continent of Mu in 1926, Churchward presented what he claimed was a definitive account of this ancient civilization. According to him, he had learned the true story not from dusty ruins, but from a series of ancient, secret clay tablets that he said were shown to him by a high priest in India during his service there. He stated that these tablets, written in the forgotten Naga Maya language, revealed that Mu was a massive continent that once stretched across the Pacific Ocean, from the Marianas Islands in the west to Easter Island in the east. This was not just any land. Churchward described it as the original Eden, the cradle of all humanity, a tropical paradise where 60 million people lived in a sophisticated and peaceful society. The Muans, or Knuckles as he called the priestly class, possessed advanced technology, understood cosmic energy, and had colonized the entire world, giving rise to all other ancient cultures. Their civilization was allegedly over 50,000 years old. Churchward's story reached its dramatic climax with the continent's destruction. He claimed that massive subterranean gas chambers located beneath Mu erupted cataclysmically, causing the entire land to shudder, fracture, and sink beneath the waves in a single terrible day and night. The few survivors, he said, became the ancestors of the various ancient races, carrying with them fragmented memories of their glorious homeland. To support his claims, Churchward pointed to various archaeological sites around the Pacific. He interpreted the massive stone statues on Easter Island, known as Moai, as sentinels left by the lost Muans. The ancient ruins of Nan Madol in Pohnpei, a city built on artificial islets, were presented as another remnant of this Pacific empire. Even the intricate glyphs and structures found from Mexico to Southeast Asia were, in his view, all cultural inheritances from the mother civilization of Mu. For professional archaeologists and geologists, however, Churchward's entire narrative is a castle built on sand. The foundational evidence, the Naga Maya tablets, have never been seen by any other scholar, and no such language is known to exist. The theory of a sunken continent in the Pacific is geologically impossible. The bedrock of the Pacific Ocean is primarily basaltic, forming a dense, heavy seafloor that sits low in the Earth's mantle. In stark contrast, the lighter, granitic rock that makes up continents simply does not exist there in the necessary quantities. The islands of the Pacific are not the mountain peaks of a drowned world. They are the tips of massive volcanic seamounts that have built up from the ocean floor over millions of years, or the coral atolls that crown them. Furthermore, the distribution of human settlements across the Pacific tells a very different and no less incredible story. Through the remarkable feat of Polynesian navigation, using nothing more than star paths, ocean swells, and the flight of birds, intrepid explorers settled these far-flung islands in a series of voyages that occurred within the last 3,000 years, not 50,000. The cultural connections between these islands are real, but they are the result of incredible human exploration across the ocean, not the remnants of a continent they all once lived on. Yet, despite its complete rejection by science, the myth of Mu endures with remarkable tenacity in popular culture. It appears in comic books, video games, and anime, often as a template for an ancient, advanced precursor race. Its persistence speaks to the same enduring human desire that fuels the search for Atlantis or Shangri-La, a longing for a simpler, unified origin story. The idea that all of humanity's disparate civilizations could spring from a single, perfect source is a powerfully comforting narrative. It simplifies the complex, often messy tapestry of human history into a single grand design. Mu, in the end, is a testament not to ancient history, but to the modern power of a compelling story, one that proves that a myth, once launched, can sometimes swim much more easily than a continent can sink. But from the sunken utopias of the Pacific, we now turn our gaze to a kingdom believed to lie not beneath the waves, but shrouded in the perpetual ice and mystical light of the far north. Our journey takes us to the edges of the ancient Greek world, to a land that represented the absolute opposite of everything familiar and known, the legendary realm of Hyperborea. Its very name tells you everything you need to know about its place in the Greek imagination. Hyperboreas meaning beyond the north wind. In myth, Boreas was the god of the harsh, cold northern wind that brought winter's bite to mainland Greece. Hyperborea, therefore, was conceived as a land so far north that it existed beyond his reach, a paradise immune to his icy touch. This was not a place of frozen wastes, but a sun-drenched idyll where Apollo, the god of light, reason, and music, was said to spend his winters. Classical writers like the poet Pindar described it in lavish detail. A perfect, fertile land where the sun shone 24 hours a day, where disease was unknown, and where the blessed inhabitants, the Hyperboreans, lived in peace and ease for 1,000 years. When they finally grew weary of their perfect existence, they would simply leap from a certain cliff into the sea, departing this life in a state of joyful satiation. It was the ultimate utopia, a land of endless summer and divine favor located in a direction the Greeks could scarcely comprehend. The fascinating question, of course, is where this idea came from. While it reads like pure fantasy, many scholars believe it was likely inspired by very real, if distorted, accounts of northern cultures that filtered down to the Mediterranean through trade routes. The ancient Greeks were masterful sailors and traders, and their networks extended far into the Black Sea region, bringing them into contact with Scythian nomads from the steppes. These Scythians might have passed on even more distant tales from the far north, perhaps from the Baltic region or Siberia. A culture like the Sami, living in the Arctic Circle with its months of midnight sun, could easily have been the kernel of truth behind the legend of a land where the sun never set. The Greeks, trying to make sense of these second or third-hand reports of a geography so alien to their own experience, may have rationalized it by placing it in the divine realm of their favorite god, Apollo. This connection was strengthened by a peculiar mythical tradition that said offerings from the Hyperboreans, wrapped in straw, would mysteriously travel from their hidden land, passed from hand to hand, until they miraculously arrived at Apollo's shrine on the island of Delos. This story reads almost like a mythological explanation for the real, long-distance trade of exotic goods like amber, which traveled from the Baltic coast down through Europe to the Mediterranean, its ultimate northern origin a mystery to the Greeks who prized it. Hyperborea's presence in classical texts is persistent but always just out of reach. The historian Herodotus, ever the inquisitive skeptic, tried to track down the truth of it in his writings. He concluded that if the Hyperboreans existed, then the Hypernatrians, those beyond the south wind, must logically exist as well, showing his attempt to apply rational geography to a clearly mythological concept. For the Romans, the poet Virgil placed Hyperborea firmly in the realm of the impossible and miraculous, a land to which one could not travel by any ordinary means. This idea of its inaccessibility only added to its allure, making it a blank space on the map that could be filled with any manner of dreams and speculations. And fill it they did. Centuries later, during the great age of Arctic exploration, the myth of Hyperborea experienced a dramatic revival, as European maps began to tentatively chart the northern reaches of Canada, Greenland, and Siberia. Explorers and mystics began to wonder if these icy landscapes could be hiding the warm paradise of legend. Some theorized that the Earth's axis had shifted, that a once temperate Arctic had been frozen in a cataclysm, burying the golden cities of Hyperborea under glaciers. This concept tapped into the same longing that drove the search for El Dorado or Shangri-La, the belief that a perfect world was waiting to be found if one could just push a little further into the unknown. This romantic, exploratory vision took a deeply dark and twisted turn in the early 20th century, when Hyperborea was co-opted by the most sinister of ideological movements, Nazi occultism. Key figures within the Nazi Onanub, their pseudo-scientific research branch, became obsessed with the idea that the Aryan race did not evolve, but descended from a divine, superhuman race of god-like beings from a lost northern kingdom. They fused the Greek myth of Hyperborea with twisted interpretations of Norse mythology and theosophical concepts to create a new, racist origin story. In this narrative, Hyperborea was the primordial homeland of the white Aryan race, a place of pure blood and ultimate power. Their theory held that when this continent was destroyed in a great cataclysm, the survivors migrated south, founding the great civilizations of Atlantis and later becoming the master race that was destined to rule the world. Heinrich Himmler and other high-ranking Nazis took these fantasies deadly seriously, launching expeditions to places like Tibet and the Arctic not only for military strategy, but in a desperate, deluded search for archaeological evidence of their Hyperborean ancestors and the powers they supposedly wielded. This horrific appropriation perverted a beautiful myth of peace and longevity into a justification for genocide and supremacist ideology, a stark reminder that the stories we tell about the past can have very real and terrible consequences in the present. Today, Hyperborea's legacy is a complex tapestry woven from Golden Age myth, speculative geography, and grim history. It stands as a powerful symbol of humanity's eternal desire to imagine a perfect world just beyond the horizon, a place untouched by the struggles and limitations of our own existence. But it also serves as a cautionary tale about how easily those dreams can be corrupted, how the search for a lost paradise can sometimes lead us not to enlightenment, but into the deepest and most dangerous of shadows. If Hyperborea was the paradise beyond the north wind, then Thule was the very edge of the known world, a place so remote it existed at the literal limits of human exploration and imagination. Our story begins not with myth, but with a daring voyage of discovery. In the 4th century B.C., a Greek explorer and geographer from Massalia, modern-day Marseille, named Pytheas embarked on an incredible journey northward. His written account on the ocean has been lost to time, but its fragments, quoted by later geographers like Strabo and Polybius, tell a tantalizing tale. Pytheas claimed to have sailed for 6 days north of Britain, past a place where the sea became a strange, thick slurry he called the sea lung, which many modern scholars believe was a description of pack ice or sea fog. His destination was an island he named Thule, a land where the sun barely set in summer, where the concepts of land, sea, and air seemed to merge into one chaotic mass. For the pragmatic Pytheas, this was likely a factual, if astonished, report of a real place, most probably the coast of Norway, or perhaps Iceland or the Shetland Islands. He was describing the disorienting and very real phenomenon of the Arctic midnight sun and the harsh environment of the far north. He placed Thule on the map as the northernmost habitable land, the ultimate frontier. For centuries after, Ultima Thule, the farthest Thule, became a standard phrase in Roman geography and literature. It was a cartographical placeholder, a symbol of the absolute boundary of the world. To say something was beyond Thule was to say it was utterly unknowable in the realm of pure fantasy. The Roman poet Virgil used it this way, and the phrase stuck, representing the final outpost of reality before the map faded into legend. For over a millennium, Thule remained in this state, a vague, distant, but fundamentally real location. This began to change during the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. As European mapmakers began to chart the globe with increasing accuracy, the literal, geographical Thule started to vanish from maps, its place taken by identified, real islands like Iceland and Greenland. But as its physical presence faded, its symbolic power grew exponentially. Unmoored from any specific location, Thule became a blank canvas for the romantic and the mystical. It transformed from a place one could theoretically sail to into a mythical ideal, a lost Arctic homeland of pristine beauty and ancient wisdom. German Romantic poets and nationalist writers of the 18th and 19th centuries, in their search for a pure, primordial origin for Germanic culture, seized upon this nebulous Thule. They began to weave it into a new national mythology, imagining it as the ancestral homeland of the German people, a Nordic paradise of heroic, fair-haired giants who possessed sacred knowledge now lost to the modern world. This romantic nationalism provided the fertile ground in which a far more sinister seed could be planted. Just as with Hyperborea, the myth of Thule was catastrophically absorbed into the twisted ideology of Nazi Germany. In 1918, even before the Nazi Party was formally established, a secret society called the Thule Society was founded in Munich. Its membership included early Nazi Party members and influential ideologues like Rudolf Hess and Alfred Rosenberg. The society took its name directly from the Romantic myth, but its purpose was darkly occult and violently anti-Semitic. For them, Thule was no longer just a spiritual homeland, it was the Hyperborea of Nazi belief, the capital of a lost Arctic continent and the original birthplace of the Aryan race. They believed that the Nordic peoples were the direct descendants of these Hyperborean god-men from Thule, and that by unlocking the secrets of this lost world, they could awaken the dormant, supreme power within the Aryan bloodline. The Thule Society became a crucial ideological incubator for the Nazi Party, blending Völkisch nationalism, Ariosophy, a racist offshoot of Theosophy, and anti-Semitism into a potent and deadly cocktail. Their symbol, which they superimposed over a swastika and a dagger, was chosen for its alleged mystical power. This perversion of an ancient geographical term provided a pseudo-mystical, pseudo-historical foundation for the Nazis' entire worldview, giving their brutal politics a sense of ancient destiny and divine right. The legacy of Thule is therefore a story of dramatic transformation, a journey from exploration to extremism. It began as a real discovery, a testament to human curiosity and the courage to sail into the unknown. It then became a metaphor for the very limit of human knowledge, a word that captured the tantalizing space between the mapped and the unimaginable. But ultimately, it was corrupted into a weaponized myth, a fiction used to justify hatred and the pursuit of racial purity. Today, the name endures in quieter ways. NASA New Horizons mission, upon flying past the most distant object ever visited, an icy body in the Kuiper Belt billions of miles from Earth, named it Arakoth, but its initial designation was Ultima Thule, a beautiful and fitting nod to its status as the farthest frontier humanity has ever touched. This modern usage helps reclaim the term, steering it back toward its original meaning, not a homeland for a master race, but a symbol of the endless human drive to reach beyond the horizon, to explore the next ultimate Thule, whatever and wherever it may be. Leaving behind the icy myths of the North, we now plunge into the heart of a very different kind of desolation, the vast, sun-scorched sea of sand known as the Rub al-Khali, or the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula. Here, in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, lies the legend of a city whose grandeur was matched only by its pride, a place known as Iram of the Pillars. Our primary source for this story is not a Greek philosopher or a medieval poet, but the Quran itself. In the Surah al-Fajr, or the Dawn, a powerful cautionary tale is told of the tribe of Ad, a people of immense stature and strength who inhabited the desert after the great flood of Noah. They were granted great power and prosperity by God, but they grew arrogant, rejecting the teachings of their prophet, Hud, and worshipping idols instead of the one true God. To showcase their might and wealth, their king, Shaddad, ordered the construction of a magnificent, unparalleled city. This was Iram, a paradise on earth said to be filled with lush gardens, towering castles, and most famously, immense pillars, perhaps supporting its lofty structures or carved directly from the living rock. It was a testament to their engineering skill and their overwhelming hubris, a city built not for glory to God, but for glory to themselves. The Quran recounts that despite the warnings of Prophet Hud, the people of Ad persisted in their sinful arrogance. Their punishment was swift and terrifying. They were not destroyed by water like so many other lost kingdoms, but by the very element that surrounded them, the wind. God sent a savage, screaming sandstorm against them for 7 nights and 8 days, a relentless, suffocating torrent of dust and wind that scoured the city from the face of the earth. The Quran states, the like of which had never been created in the land. The city and its people were utterly obliterated, buried beneath the dunes, becoming a stark lesson for future generations about the fate that awaits those who defy divine will. For centuries, Aram was considered by many Western scholars to be a purely mythological place, a powerful allegory with no basis in historical fact. The sheer scale and emptiness of the Rub al-Khali made the idea of a lost city there seem like a fantasy. That perception began to change dramatically in the early 1990s, thanks to a combination of ancient texts and modern technology. The key was a mention of Aram outside of the Quran, in the famous collection of stories known as 1001 Nights. In the tale of Abdullah the Fisherman and Abdullah the Merman, a Bedouin discovers a fabulous deserted city made of topaz, gold, and silver in the desert, which is named as Aram. This story led researchers to a specific clue. Its description situated Aram on a trade route between Oman and the Jordanian city of Petra. This geographical hint provided a potential search area. The real breakthrough, however, came from above. Archaeologists and space scientists began analyzing images from the American Space Shuttle Challenger's radar topography mission, as well as from commercial satellites. In the early 1990s, a team led by space archaeologist Dr. Joris Zarens, working as part of a project for the television series Nova, focused on this ancient trade route. The radar imagery revealed something astonishing: a network of ancient, long-vanished caravan tracks, all converging on a single, specific point in modern-day Oman. When they investigated this site on the ground near a place now called Shisar, they found the remains of a significant settlement. There was a large, octagonal fort with thick walls and 8 tall towers surrounding a central courtyard. More importantly, they discovered that the entire area showed clear signs of a massive, sudden cataclysm. The ground was littered with evidence of a colossal sinkhole or cave-in, suggesting the land had simply collapsed beneath the structures. The theory that emerged was both simple and compelling. This region sits atop a vast limestone plateau riddled with caves and caverns. The people of this city, likely a wealthy hub on the frankincense trade route, depended on a large, natural limestone cavern as their primary source of water. If this cavern ceiling had collapsed, perhaps triggered by a major earthquake or even the relentless pounding of a rare, massive rainstorm, it would have caused the city's sole water source to vanish instantly and the ground to give way. For a desert civilization, the loss of water was a death sentence. The city would have been rapidly abandoned and then slowly, over centuries, buried by the encroaching sands of the empty quarter. So was this site, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site called Ubar, the historical Aram of the Pillars. The evidence is tantalizing. It was a major, wealthy city on the frankincense route. It met a sudden and catastrophic end linked to the earth itself, and its memory persisted in local Bedouin folklore as a cursed, lost place. The Quranic description of a city of many pillars could be a metaphorical reference to the tall towers of the fort, or perhaps to the stone columns of its buildings now long gone. The story of a divine sandstorm could be a powerful oral tradition preserving the memory of the city's burial by the desert after its collapse. The discovery doesn't prove the theological narrative, but it provides a stunning historical and archaeological foundation for it. It shows how a real, prosperous city could indeed vanish almost without a trace in the desert. Its downfall so complete and dramatic that it would be remembered for millennia as a lesson and a warning. Iram stands as a powerful bridge between scripture and science, a reminder that even the most enduring legends often have their roots in a grain of truth, waiting to be uncovered by the shifting sands of time. From the sun-blasted deserts of Arabia, we now travel to a land of misty shores and poetic tragedy, to a kingdom lost not to wind or war, but to the frailties of a single, careless man. Our journey takes us to the western coast of Wales, to the haunting legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod, which translates to the Lowland Hundred or the Bottom Hundred. This is not a story of a city, but of an entire fertile kingdom that once stretched for some 20 miles across what is now Cardigan Bay, a rich and populous land protected from the sea by a great dike. The ruler of this paradise was King Gwydno Garanhir, a just and prosperous monarch. The kingdom's defense against the ever-present sea was a massive embankment, a wall of earth and stone punctuated by sluice gates that allowed fresh water to drain out at low tide while keeping the salt water at bay. The maintenance of these crucial gates was a position of immense responsibility, a task entrusted to a man named Zealandia, who was not only the official gatekeeper but also a close friend and drinking companion of the king. The tale, passed down through Welsh poetry and folklore, tells of a night of terrible storm and unthinkable negligence. While the winds howled and the waves surged, Zealandia was not at his post, diligently monitoring the tide. Instead, he was at the king's palace, deeply immersed in a rockhouse feast. As the mead and ale flowed, Zealandia grew more and more drunk, completely forgetting his sacred duty to secure the sluice gates against the rising storm surge. By the time the alarm was raised, it was too late. The sea burst through the neglected defenses, pouring into the low-lying plains with unstoppable force. The stories describe a frantic, hopeless flight as the waters rose, drowning the fields, forests, villages, and thousands of inhabitants in a single horrific night. King Gwydno himself barely escaped with his life, forced to watch his entire domain vanish beneath the churning grey waves. In one version of the myth, the disaster was foretold by a maiden named Mararid, the keeper of the fairy fountain, whose tears overflowed and caused the flood after she was neglected. A poignant layer of poetic justice added to the tale of human error. The legend endures as a powerful Welsh counterpart to the stories of Lyonesse and Ys, a timeless cautionary tale about the consequences of failing in one's duty, especially when that duty is all that stands between civilization and the raw, unforgiving power of nature. What makes the story of Cantre'r Gwaelod so compellingly persistent is that, like the legend of Lyonesse, it is firmly anchored in a landscape that still offers tangible, visible proof of its past. For centuries, fishermen sailing in Cardigan Bay have reported sighting the remnants of human habitation beneath the waves. At certain exceptionally low tides, particularly during spring tides, the sea pulls back to reveal something astonishing off the coast near the towns of Borth and Ys, the stumps of an ancient petrified forest preserved in the peat beds where they grew. These are not mere scattered logs, but the remains of a vast woodland consisting of oak, pine, birch, and hazel trees, their roots still firmly embedded in the soil they grew in thousands of years ago. Alongside these tree stumps, fishermen and walkers have occasionally uncovered even more dramatic evidence: human and animal footprints preserved in the hardened peat, and even the remnants of walkways made from woven branches, suggesting that people were indeed living and working in this area when it was dry land. The scientific explanation for this sunken world is one of climate change and geology, not of drunken folly. Towards the end of the last ice age, some 12,000 years ago, so much water was locked up in global ice sheets that sea levels were dramatically lower. The plain that is now Cardigan Bay was indeed a vast, fertile extension of the Welsh coastline, a lowland area crisscrossed by rivers and covered in dense forests. As the climate warmed and the glaciers melted, sea levels began a slow but relentless rise, a process that continued for millennia. This was not a single, catastrophic event, but a gradual inundation that would have forced human populations to continually retreat inland over generations. The preserved forest floor we see today represents one of the last stands of that once great wooded plain, eventually succumbing to the sea around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Major storm events would have dramatically accelerated the process in certain areas, causing sudden and devastating erosion that could have wiped out entire settlements in a single night, events so traumatic they would have been seared into the cultural memory of the people who witnessed them. The legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod is the beautiful, human-shaped story that grew around this geological truth. It takes the slow, impersonal process of post-glacial sea level rise and turns it into a memorable drama with a clear moral. The forgotten duty of Zealandia provides a simple, understandable cause for a complex natural phenomenon. It transforms an abstract environmental process into a gripping narrative of human failure, poetic justice, and irreversible loss. This story gave our ancestors a way to explain the somber evidence they themselves could see. The tree stumps emerging like skeletons from the sand, the stories of fishing nets snagging on unseen structures below the waves. Even today, when the tides retreat far enough to reveal the ghostly forest, it is impossible to stand on that wet sand and not feel the eerie weight of the legend, to hear the echo of that long-ago feast and the crashing wave that drowned 100. Cantre'r Gwaelod remains a powerful symbol of how landscapes shape myths and how myths, in turn, help us make sense of the landscapes we have lost. Leaving the windswept shores of Wales, we now sail east across the North Sea to the colder, choppier waters of the Baltic, where German, Slavic, and Scandinavian legends converge on a single, glittering prize lost beneath the waves, the fabled city of Vinter. If Cantre'r Gwaelod is a story of one man's failure, Vinter is a sweeping saga of an entire society's moral decay, a bustling metropolis whose legendary wealth was eclipsed only by its legendary arrogance. Described in medieval chronicles as the largest and most prosperous trading city in all of Europe, Vinter was said to be a stunningly cosmopolitan hub where Slavic, Viking, and Saxon merchants lived and traded together, its warehouses overflowing with rare spices, fine wines, luxurious furs, and gleaming amber. The city was so wealthy, the stories say, that its common household utensils were made of solid silver, and the ropes of its ships were spun from silk. But this immense prosperity came with a terrible price. The inhabitants grew vain, greedy, and cruel, their hearts hardened by their own good fortune. The legends surrounding its downfall are as rich and varied as the goods in its markets, but they all share a common, moralizing theme: divine punishment for the sin of pride. In one version, a captured mermaid is put on display in the city square as a curiosity. As she dies in captivity, she curses Vinter, prophesying that it will be swallowed by the sea within 3 days. Another tale tells of a simple baker's son who witnesses the city's cruelty firsthand. When a beggar comes to the city gates pleading for scraps, the wealthy citizens mock him and set their dogs upon him. The boy, moved by compassion, gives the beggar his last loaf of bread. The beggar, revealed to be a holy man or a god in disguise, tells the boy to flee the city immediately and not look back. As the boy reaches high ground, he hears a terrible roar and turns to see a colossal wave rising from a calm sea to consume the entire sinful city in a single, violent surge. This narrative, echoing the biblical stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, cemented Vinter's legacy as a cautionary tale for maritime traders across northern Europe, a permanent reminder that no amount of wealth could protect them from the judgment of the deep. The persistent power of the Vinter myth, however, stems from its likely inspiration in very real and very powerful Viking Age trading centers. During the early medieval period, the southern coast of the Baltic was dotted with immensely prosperous emporia, coastal trading towns that acted as nerve centers for networks stretching from Constantinople to Dublin. The most famous of these was Jomsborg, a semi-legendary stronghold of the feared Jomsvikings, said to be a fortress of unparalleled discipline and military might that also served as a key commercial hub. Another prime candidate is the well-documented site of Avalon in present-day Poland. Archaeological excavations at Avalon have revealed a massive, multi-ethnic trading settlement that matches many descriptions of Winter, a place where Slavic, Scandinavian, and Germanic peoples lived side by side, engaged in crafts and trade on an industrial scale. The city was wealthy, powerful, and crucially, it was repeatedly destroyed by fire, by Danish raids, and ultimately by the shifting political and economic tides of the Middle Ages. The memory of such a place rising to greatness and then vanishing from the historical record provides a perfect historical core around which the pearl of a grand moral legend could form. The search for a literal, sunken Winter has captivated explorers and historians for centuries. Generations of divers and archaeologists have scoured the Baltic coast, particularly around the island of Usedom, where folklore firmly places the city. Sonar scans have occasionally revealed intriguing, geometric shapes on the seafloor, and storms have sometimes exposed what appear to be the remnants of ancient wooden pilings. Yet, no definitive underwater metropolis has ever been found. This is likely because the truth is more complex and, in many ways, more fascinating than a single cataclysm. The legend of a city swallowed by the sea is a powerful metaphor for a very real geological process, the constant, relentless change of the Baltic coastline. This region is geologically active, experiencing both isostatic rebound where the land is still rising after being compressed by Ice Age glaciers, and localized subsidence in other areas. Combined with fierce storms and significant coastal erosion, these forces have dramatically altered the shoreline over the centuries. What was once a thriving peninsula with a protected harbor could easily have become a vulnerable island, and then a submerged ruin over a few hundred years. The story of a single divine wave is a dramatic compression of this slow, inexorable process of a city being gradually abandoned to the advancing sea, its memory preserved not in stone but in story. Winter's true legacy, then, is not as a specific archaeological site waiting to be found, but as a profound cultural echo. It represents the very real dangers and immense rewards of the medieval maritime trade, a world where a ship could return with a king's ransom or vanish without a trace. The legend gave communities a way to process the anxiety that came with such an unpredictable livelihood, attributing disaster not to random chance, but to a moral failing that could, in theory, be avoided. It served as a warning against the corrupting influence of unchecked wealth and the hubris of believing oneself master of the sea. Even today, fishermen in the region swear that on still, quiet mornings, they can sometimes hear the faint sound of church bells tolling from beneath the waves, a sonic ghost of a city that serves as an eternal reminder that the sea always claims its due. But as the bells of sunken Winter faded into the mists of the Baltic, our search for lost kingdoms turned south to a landscape defined not by water but by its absolute absence. We now venture into the vast, sun-bleached expanse of the Libyan desert, one of the most arid and inhospitable places on our planet. Here, amidst the endless dunes and searing heat, Bedouin tribes have whispered for centuries of a phantom paradise known as Zealandia, the oasis of little birds. This legend was not one of divine punishment, but of tantalizing invitation, a story that would ultimately drive some of the most daring desert expeditions of the 20th century. The tales described it as a white city, its gates carved with the image of a bird, hidden within a valley of palms and lush springs. Inside, it was said to be filled with untold treasure, but its inhabitants were not living souls. They were a king and queen and their entire court, all in a deep, enchanted sleep, guarded by silent, giant black sentinels. To find Zealandia was to discover a world suspended in time, a secret garden in the heart of a barren wilderness. This captivating myth did not remain a mere fireside story. In the early 20th century, as the great European powers were carving up North Africa, the legend of Zealandia reached the ears of a new generation of explorers, soldiers, and adventurers. For them, the blank spaces on the map of the Sahara were an irresistible challenge, and Zerzura provided the perfect objective. The quest was taken up most famously by a group of dashing, resourceful men who would become known as the Zerzura Club, including the Hungarian Count Laszlo Olmosy, who would later be immortalized as the fictional protagonist in The English Patient. Theirs was not a casual hobby, it was a serious, competitive, and perilous endeavor. They equipped themselves with the new technology of the day, specially modified Ford motor cars and later aircraft to penetrate a region the local Bedouin called the Abode of the Devil, a terrifying sea of sand known as the Sand Sea of Kalanchio. Their expeditions in the 1920s and 30s were feats of incredible endurance, navigating by sextant and compass, battling sandstorms, mechanical breakdowns, and the ever-present threat of dying of thirst. The search for a fabled city became the driving force behind the actual, scientific mapping of one of the last uncharted regions on Earth. What these explorers ultimately discovered, however, was far more fascinating than a single lost city. They did not find sleeping giants or gates carved with birds, but they did unlock the genuine secrets of the desert, solving the geographical mystery at the heart of the legend. Scattered throughout the deepest, most remote parts of the Libyan desert, they found a series of breathtakingly beautiful oases known as the Gilf Kebir Plateau. These were not continuous valleys, but isolated pockets of life like the legendary Wadi Sura or the Cave of Swimmers, made famous by Olmosy. They also discovered the incredible Kafra oasis, a sprawling network of springs and farms that had been hidden from the outside world for centuries. These were the real Zerzura's places that, from the perspective of a weary desert traveler dying of thirst, would indeed have seemed like miraculous, treasure-filled paradises. The sleeping giants of the tale were likely the massive, dark rock formations that stand watch over these hidden valleys, and the treasure was the most precious resource in the desert, fresh, life-giving water. The true legacy of the Zerzura quest, therefore, is not a discovered city, but a discovered truth. The legend served as a perfect cultural and navigational marker, a way for the indigenous people to encode the existence and location of these critical water sources into a memorable, compelling story that would be passed down through generations. It was a map in the form of a myth. The European explorers, in their relentless pursuit of a fairy tale, inadvertently honored this tradition. By following the story, they were led to the very real, life-sustaining heart of the desert. Their expeditions, driven by romance and competition, filled in the last blank spaces on the map of the Sahara and revealed that sometimes the greatest treasure a lost kingdom can offer is not gold or jewels, but simply the knowledge of how to survive in a beautiful but merciless world. The story of Zerzura endures as a perfect example of how a legend can guide us to reality, proving that every myth, no matter how fantastical, often begins with a genuine need to explain and navigate the wonders of our world. From the scorching, silent deserts of Zerzura, a legend born not of geography but of pure, unadulterated hope now calls to us. We journey from the search for water to the search for a savior, from the sands of Africa to the very heart of medieval Christendom's deepest anxieties and wildest dreams. This is the story of the Kingdom of Prester John, a mythical empire that for centuries was the most sought-after destination on the map of the European imagination, a beacon of light in what was perceived as a world encircled by darkness. In the 12th century, Europe was a continent under pressure. The crusades to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control were faltering, often ending in bloody and humiliating defeat. Christendom felt isolated, besieged by powerful Islamic empires to the east and south. It was in this climate of fear and longing that a letter arrived, a document so extraordinary it would shape foreign policy and fuel exploration for the next 400 years. Addressed to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, the letter claimed to be from a man named Prester John. Presbyter is the Latin word for priest, and he declared himself not just a king, but a priest-king, the absolute ruler of a vast, fabulously wealthy, and devoutly Christian kingdom located somewhere far beyond the known world. This was not just any Christian kingdom, it was a utopia of staggering proportions. His letter described a realm where peace, justice, and piety were universal. It contained the fountain of youth, which kept all its citizens in perfect health. It was home to mythical creatures like giants and men with dogs' heads, and its architecture was beyond comprehension, including a palace made of crystal and a magic mirror that could show any occurrence in any part of his dominion. Most importantly, Prester John spoke of his immense military might and his burning desire to come to the aid of his European brethren, to march west and help them crush the Muslim powers that stood between them. For a beleaguered Europe, this was electrifying news. It was the ultimate fantasy, a powerful, distant ally who shared their faith and was coming to their rescue. The letter, of course, was a masterful forgery, likely crafted by a clever Western cleric, but its impact was immediate and profound. It was copied and translated across the continent, becoming a medieval bestseller and embedding itself firmly in the European psyche. The initial search for this miraculous kingdom focused squarely on Asia, the land of endless wonders in the medieval mind. The name Prester John itself provides a crucial clue to its possible origins. Many historians believe the legend was inspired by garbled accounts of a very real and significant military victory in Central Asia. In the year 1141, a Mongol ruler and his allies, who were Nestorian Christians, defeated the Muslim Seljuk Sultan Sanjar near Samarkand. Nestorian Christianity was a branch of the faith that had spread eastward along the Silk Road, establishing communities as far away as China. News of this Christian victory over a Muslim power would have traveled slowly westward, becoming distorted and magnified with each retelling. A distant, powerful Christian king defeating a Muslim sultan. This was the exact narrative Europe was desperate to hear. The story fit the Prester John mold so perfectly that it almost certainly formed the historical nucleus of the myth. When the great European explorers like Marco Polo later ventured into the Mongol Empire in the 13th century, they were actively listening for whispers of Prester John's court. They heard tales of Christian communities in the lands of the Mongols and the Karaites, and they reported back with excitement, believing they were getting closer to locating the legendary priest-king's domain. For a time, the search for Prester John became inextricably linked with the European attempt to understand the vast, mysterious power of the Mongol Khans, even giving rise to hopes that the Mongols could be converted and turned into allies against Islam. But as European knowledge of Asia grew more accurate through the travels of men like Polo and later missionaries, a frustrating problem emerged. No sprawling Christian utopia was to be found there. The Mongol Khans were not secret Christians waiting to ally with Europe. They were a power unto themselves with their own agendas. The myth needed a new home, a fresh blank space on the map where such a kingdom could still plausibly exist. Its location shifted dramatically from the east to the south, to a land that was known to Europeans in name only, Ethiopia. This was a brilliant relocation. Ethiopia was indeed a real Christian kingdom, isolated in the highlands of East Africa, surrounded by Muslim states. It had been Christian since the 4th century, and its independent Coptic church was a source of fascination. Because so few Europeans had ever been there, it remained shrouded in mystery, a perfect vessel for the Prester John legend. The myth attached itself to the Ethiopian negus or emperor with such force that for the next 2 centuries, European monarchs and popes sincerely addressed diplomatic letters to Prester John, Emperor of Ethiopia. This belief had tangible, real-world consequences. It was a major motivating factor behind the Portuguese explorations down the coast of Africa in the 15th century. Navigators like Bartolomeu Dias and Vasco da Gama weren't just looking for a sea route to India. They were also hoping to make contact with the legendary Christian king, to finally link up with this powerful ally and open a second front against the Islamic world. When the Portuguese finally did make contact with the Ethiopian Empire in the 1520s, the reality was, of course, a profound disappointment. The Ethiopians were indeed Christian, but their kingdom was not the utopian paradise of the letter. They were struggling in a fierce war against Ahmed Gran and the Adal Sultanate, and were in desperate need of European aid themselves, not the other way around. The legend of the all-powerful Prester John, who would sweep in to save Europe, evaporated upon first contact, though the diplomatic and religious connections between Europe and Ethiopia remained important. The enduring power of the Prester John story lies not in its truth but in its function. It was never really about finding a place, it was about fulfilling a psychological need. For medieval Europe, it was a narrative of hope, a comfort against the terrifying notion of isolation. It was a story that said, "You are not alone. Out there, beyond the lands of your enemies, is a brother, a king, a priest who is more powerful and righteous than you can imagine, and he is coming to help." It was a myth that made the vast, unknown world seem less threatening and more full of possibility. It drove exploration, shaped diplomacy, and demonstrated the incredible power of a story to will itself into reality, if only for a little while. The kingdom of Prester John was the most magnificent castle ever built in the air, and its foundations were made of the most durable material of all, human hope. But from the hopeful fantasy of a Christian ally, we turn our attention to a wonder of pure, breathtaking beauty, a marvel so iconic that its very existence remains one of history's most captivating puzzles. This brings us not to a lost kingdom, but to a legendary wonder born from one, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The image is etched into our collective imagination, a magnificent tiered ziggurat of verdant terraces, overflowing with exotic trees, vibrant flowers, and lush shrubs, rising like a man-made mountain of greenery against the dusty Mesopotamian sky. Elaborate irrigation systems, possibly using the famed Archimedes screw, would have been needed to lift water from the Euphrates River to these incredible heights, creating a miraculous oasis of cool shade and tranquil beauty in the heart of a flat, sun-scorched plain. This was said to be the ultimate romantic gesture, a gift from the powerful King Nebuchadnezzar II to his Median wife, Queen Amytis, who missed the green, mountainous landscapes of her homeland. The gardens, as described by later Greek and Roman historians, were not merely a park but a profound symbol of a king's power to bend nature itself to his will, a testament to Babylonian engineering genius and opulence. Yet, for a wonder so famous, its historical footprint is frustratingly faint. The greatest mystery surrounding the Hanging Gardens is the complete and utter lack of any definitive archaeological evidence for them at the site of Babylon itself. Extensive excavations, including those led by the renowned German archaeologist Robert Koldewey over a century ago, have uncovered the magnificent foundations of Babylon's walls, the grand processional way, the dazzling Ishtar Gate, and even what was once believed to be the base of the Tower of Babel. But no trace of the elaborate water-raising machinery, the massive stone foundations needed to support such heavy, saturated soil, or the unique basements required for such a structure has ever been found. Even more damning is the silence from the very people who should have been boasting about it the most. While Nebuchadnezzar left behind extensive inscriptions detailing his building projects, his palaces, temples, and city walls, there is not a single contemporary Babylonian text that mentions the construction of these world-famous gardens. This glaring absence has led many scholars to a startling conclusion: what if the gardens weren't in Babylon at all? This question opens the door to a compelling and well-argued theory that has gained significant traction. The Hanging Gardens were real, but they were built in a different kingdom entirely, the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, by a different monarch, King Sennacherib, nearly a century earlier. The evidence for this alternative origin is surprisingly robust. Assyriologist Dr. Stephanie Daly of the University of Oxford has championed this theory, pointing to ancient cuneiform texts that describe Sennacherib's own incredible palace and its surrounding gardens. His own inscriptions boast of a wonder for all peoples, describing a complex system of canals, dams, and aqueducts to bring water from over 50 miles away, and most intriguingly, the use of a never-before-seen innovation, a chain of bronze screws that continuously lifted water to great heights. This sounds remarkably similar to the technology later Greek historians attributed to the Babylonian gardens. Furthermore, surviving stone carvings from Sennacherib's palace actually depict a lush, terraced garden gracing the side of a building, a visual match for the later descriptions. The theory suggests that when Babylonian and Assyrian territories were later conquered by the Persians, and then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, the stories of these two magnificent capitals and their wonders became conflated. Greek soldiers and historians, hearing tales of the spectacular gardens of Mesopotamia, may have simply attributed the most famous one to the most famous city, Babylon, erasing the Assyrian king's accomplishment from popular memory. Of course, there is a third, more radical possibility, that the Hanging Gardens were never a physical place but a purely mythical construct, a literary ideal of the perfect Oriental palace garden. The most detailed descriptions of the gardens come from Greek historians like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus, writing centuries after the fall of Babylon. They were describing a city that was already a magnificent ruin, a place of legend. It is entirely possible that these writers, who never saw the gardens themselves, were weaving together travelers' tales, poetic exaggerations, and their own cultural fantasies about the lavish and decadent East. The garden as a symbol of a controlled, paradisiacal nature was a powerful motif across many ancient cultures. The Greeks, encountering the remains of the massive ziggurats of Mesopotamia, stepped, mountain-like structures, might have imagined them covered in the flora of a sacred grove, creating a composite fantasy of the ultimate royal garden. Regardless of their physical reality, the enduring appeal of the Hanging Gardens is undeniable. They represent humanity's ancient and perpetual desire to create beauty and order out of a wild and often harsh natural world. They are the ultimate symbol of love, power, and ingenuity, a dream of a green sanctuary built against all odds. This dream has proven so powerful that it has cemented the garden's place on the canonical list of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, ensuring that the name of Babylon will forever be associated with this phantom of verdant splendor. The mystery of their existence only adds to their allure, inviting us to keep searching, to keep wondering if evidence for Sennacherib's garden will be found, or if we will forever be chasing a mirage, a testament to the idea that sometimes the most enduring wonders are those built not from stone and mortar but from story and dream. But if the search for Prester John was a quest driven by hope and the Hanging Gardens a puzzle of misplaced credit, our next story is one of pure, consuming obsession, a mystery that swallowed a man whole and cast a shadow over the Amazon for a century. We now venture into the deepest, darkest green of the Brazilian rainforest, into the legend of Colonel Percy Fawcett and his lost city of Z. The tale begins not with ancient myth, but with the height of early 20th century exploration, a time when the map still held blank spaces labeled unexplored, and the Royal Geographical Society in London dispatched men of iron will to fill them in. Percy Fawcett was the archetype of this breed, a British artillery officer, a skilled surveyor, and a man of seemingly limitless endurance. He was hired to chart the contested borders of Bolivia and Brazil, and over the course of 7 grueling expeditions between 1906 and 1924, he became utterly convinced that the Amazon, long dismissed by scientists as a counterfeit paradise incapable of supporting complex civilization, held a secret. He wasn't searching for El Dorado's gold, he was searching for proof of a sophisticated, ancient society he cryptically called simply Z. Fawcett's theory was radical for its time. He believed a large, advanced, pre-Columbian city lay hidden in the unexplored region of Mato Grosso. his conviction was fueled by a mixture of hard evidence and romantic intuition. He had seen strange, hieroglyphic-like inscriptions on rocks, heard persistent indigenous tales of stone cities lost in the jungle, and even obtained a controversial 17th-century Portuguese manuscript, the Manuscript 512, which described a lost, silver-laden city with arches and multi-storied buildings discovered by bandeirantes or explorers. He also pointed to the existence of unusually complex earthworks and pottery fragments that suggested a level of cultural development far beyond the small, nomadic tribes Europeans typically encountered. Fawcett, a man steeped in the then-fashionable theories of spiritualism and theosophy, also believed he and his family possessed a unique psychic connection that would guide him to the lost city. This blend of rugged empiricism and esoteric belief made him a fascinating and, to some, a suspect figure. The scientific establishment largely ridiculed his ideas, holding firm to the dogma that the poor Amazonian soil could never have supported the dense populations needed to build a true urban center. Undaunted, Fawcett planned his final, definitive expedition. In April 1925, he set out into the uncharted headwaters of the Xingu River with only 2 companions, his devoted eldest son, Jack, and Jack's lifelong friend, Rolly Rimmel. They carried supplies for a year but intended to be gone for 2, living off the land. Fawcett, fearing others would steal his glory if he revealed his route, was deliberately secretive. His last known communication was a letter dispatched from a remote outpost called Dead Horse Camp, in which he expressed high hopes and was about to enter territory never before visited by a European. Then, silence, they vanished without a trace. Their disappearance ignited one of the greatest exploration mysteries of the 20th century. Over the next decade, no fewer than 13 major rescue expeditions were launched, and more than 100 adventurers would themselves perish or disappear in the green hell of the Amazon trying to solve the riddle of Fawcett's fate. The jungle seemed to have swallowed them completely, giving rise to 1,000 theories. They were killed by a hostile tribe, they succumbed to disease or starvation. Fawcett went mad and founded a cult, or perhaps most tantalizingly, he actually found his city and chose to stay there, cut off from the modern world. For decades, Fawcett was seen as a tragic, quixotic figure, a man who chased a phantom and paid the ultimate price for a delusion. The scientific consensus held that he was simply, tragically wrong. But in a stunning turn of events, the 21st century has begun to vindicate his core belief, if not his specific fate. A revolutionary archaeological field known as landscape archaeology, powered by new technologies like satellite imagery and LiDAR, a laser mapping system that can see through the dense forest canopy, has utterly transformed our understanding of the Amazon's past. We now know that the rainforest is not a pristine wilderness but a vast, humanized landscape. LiDAR scans have revealed the ghostly outlines of enormous, intricate settlements hidden beneath the green veil. These were not the isolated villages scientists once imagined, but large, planned towns featuring monumental earthworks, defensive ditches, causeways, roads that stretch for dozens of miles, and sophisticated agricultural systems involving fertile, man-made soils known as terra preta. The scale is staggering. Some of these garden cities are estimated to have housed tens of thousands of people. Cultures like the Kuhukugu and the Marajora possessed a level of social complexity that rivals many ancient Old World societies. They engineered their environment on a grand scale, cultivating orchards and managing the forest in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The profound irony is that Fawcett, for all his mystical leanings, was essentially right. The Amazon did contain the ruins of significant, complex civilizations. He was just looking for the wrong kind of city. He was searching for something that mirrored his own world, a city of stone like those found in the Andes or Mesoamerica. But the great civilizations of the Amazon built with wood and earth, materials that decompose with stunning speed in the humid tropics. Within a generation or two of a society's collapse, the jungle would have reclaimed everything, leaving only the faintest, most easily missed traces on the forest floor. Traces that a man like Fawcett, trudging through the undergrowth, might have walked right over without ever realizing it. His lost city of Z was not a single mythical place, but a reality that was all around him, invisible in its scale and made of the wrong materials for his eyes to see. Percy Fawcett disappeared searching for a legend, but in doing so, he pointed the way toward a truth far more incredible than even he could have dreamed, that the world's greatest rainforest is not just a natural wonder, but the overgrown tomb of a forgotten human story, a story we are only now, almost 100 years later, finally learning how to read. While the Amazon hid its cities in plain sight, built from the very earth and trees that concealed them, another legendary kingdom captured the European imagination with a promise of a more tangible, gleaming treasure. North of the Spanish territories in Mexico, the stories spoke of a land where wealth was not hidden but displayed in the open, a place where 7 magnificent cities were said to be constructed entirely from gold. This was the myth of Cibola, a tale that would lure hundreds of conquistadors on a desperate, brutal march across the vast and unforgiving landscapes of what is now the American Southwest. The origins of this intoxicating legend are a classic case of a game of transcontinental telephone, where a traveler's tale was warped by distance, translation, and desperate hope. The spark likely came from an unlikely source: 4 shipwrecked Spanish explorers who, in 1536, were washed ashore on the coast of Texas. Led by Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, these men spent 8 incredible years wandering across the continent, living among various Native American tribes as healers and slaves, becoming the first Europeans to traverse the American Gulf Coast and northern Mexico. When they finally stumbled into a Spanish outpost in 1536, their account of the lands they had seen was nothing short of miraculous. They spoke of hearing stories from indigenous people about large, prosperous cities somewhere to the north, settlements of multi-storied buildings that shone brilliantly in the sun. In the minds of the Spanish listeners, conditioned by their recent conquest of the gold-rich empires of the Aztecs and Incas, the description of these shining cities could mean only one thing: another empire ripe for plunder, its buildings sheathed in gold. The name Cibola was reportedly given by the locals, and it stuck, becoming synonymous with unimaginable wealth. The story found its most eager and influential believer in the Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza. Eager to claim this prize for the Spanish crown and outmaneuver his rivals, he organized a grand expedition and placed its command in the hands of a young, ambitious nobleman, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. In 1540, Coronado set out from Compostela with a massive force that was a testament to his expectations. Over 300 Spanish conquistadors, more than 1,000 indigenous Mexican allies, hundreds of horses, and great herds of cattle, sheep, and pigs to sustain them. They were an army on the move, a traveling city of avarice, fully prepared for conquest and occupation. Their guide was a Franciscan friar named Marcos de Niza, who had been sent on a preliminary scouting mission and had returned with a report that sealed the deal. He claimed to have seen one of the cities from a distance, describing it as larger than Mexico City and so wealthy that its inhabitants used dishes of gold and silver. He may have been exaggerating to secure funding, or he may have genuinely mistaken the adobe walls of a pueblo glowing in the setting sun for precious metal. Either way, his testimony launched 1,000 men into the unknown. The reality that Coronado's expedition encountered was a far cry from the golden paradise they had been promised. After months of grueling travel, they reached the first of the so-called 7 cities, the Zuni Pueblo of Huaca in present-day New Mexico. What they found was not a metropolis of gold, but a compact, fortified village of multi-storied adobe apartments. To the Spanish, exhausted, hungry, and desperate for glory, it must have been a soul-crushing sight. when the Zuni defenders, understandably hostile to this armed foreign legion, refused them entry and drew a line of cornmeal on the ground as a warning, Coronado ordered an attack. The conquistadors, with their steel armor, firearms, and cavalry, easily stormed the pueblo, but their victory was hollow. There was no gold, there was only corn, beans, and turquoise. The great treasure of Cibola was nothing more than baked mud shimmering in the arid heat. In a bitter letter to Viceroy Mendoza, Coronado confessed the devastating truth, writing that Friar Marcos has not told the truth in a single thing he said. But Coronado was already in too deep. Refusing to return to Mexico in total humiliation, he spent the next 2 years desperately crisscrossing the modern American Southwest and Great Plains, chasing ever fainter whispers of wealth. His expedition became a journey of breathtaking discovery and profound cruelty. They were the first Europeans to see the Grand Canyon, a sight so immense it left them speechless. They marveled at the vast herds of buffalo on the plains. They encountered the intricate apartment-like villages of the Hopi and the Rio Grande Pueblos. But their search was relentless and destructive. They demanded food and supplies from the very people whose homes they were pillaging, often resorting to violence and intimidation. At the Tiguex Pueblo near modern-day Albuquerque, a particularly brutal series of events, including the burning of hundreds of surrendered warriors at the stake, marked one of the darkest chapters of Spanish-Indian relations in North America. The quest for Cibola had degenerated from a search for fantasy into a very real campaign of terror. The ultimate irony, of course, is that the legend was built upon a foundation of truth, just wildly misinterpreted. The 7 cities of gold were the ancient pueblos of the Zuni, Hopi, and other Puebloan peoples. Their buildings, constructed from earth and stone, did indeed shine with a golden hue at dawn and dusk. Their wealth was not in precious metal, but in a sophisticated and sustainable culture, complex social structures, and a deep understanding of the harsh desert environment. They cultivated crops in lands the Spanish considered barren, and built lasting communities in places the conquistadors found unbearable. The real treasure was the cultural landscape itself, a wonder Coronado and his men were completely blind to in their single-minded pursuit of El Dorado's North American cousin. Coronado finally returned to Mexico in 1542, a broken and disgraced man. His expedition was a catastrophic financial failure, having bankrupted its backers and yielded none of the promised returns. For the Spanish crown, it was a lesson in the limits of New World riches. Yet, its legacy was profound and permanent. While it failed to find cities of gold, it succeeded in mapping a vast new territory for Spain, opening up the American Southwest to future colonization and irrevocably altering the destiny of the indigenous peoples who lived there. The myth of Cibola, born from a shipwreck and a mirage, ultimately led not to the discovery of a lost kingdom, but to the creation of a new world, one whose history would be written in the much more valuable and much more durable currencies of land, culture, and conflict. Leaving behind the sun-scorched deserts of the American Southwest and the shattered dreams of Coronado, our quest for lost kingdoms now turns to a land of deep, cold fjords and vast boreal forests, a story born not from Spanish greed, but from French ambition, fueled by the captivating tales of the people who knew this rugged land best. We journey to the northern reaches of New France in the 16th century, to the powerful currents of the St. Lawrence River, where a new legend was taking shape, the mysterious kingdom of Saguenay. The origins of this particular myth are unique, rooted not in a European forgery or a philosophical allegory, but in the genuine, if misunderstood, testimony of the indigenous Iroquoian people. In 1535, the French explorer Jacques Cartier made his second voyage up the St. Lawrence. At the village of Stadacona, where Quebec City now stands, he met with the local leader, Donnacona. Eager to impress and perhaps intimidate his powerful visitor, Donnacona and his sons began to tell stories of a fabulously wealthy kingdom that lay far to the northwest, up a great river that flowed into the St. Lawrence. They called this land the Kingdom of Saguenay. Their descriptions were likely grounded in practical, economic reality. They spoke of immense quantities of a precious reddish metal canetazo in their language, which the French immediately interpreted as copper, and of abundant furs and other valuable resources. For the Stadaconans, this was probably a description of a real trade network that extended deep into the interior, where the rich copper deposits around Lake Superior were mined and traded across the continent. They may also have been referring to the resources of the actual Saguenay River region, a dramatic fjord-like valley north of the St. Lawrence known for its mineral wealth. But in the alchemy of wishful thinking and cross-cultural mistranslation, this practical information was transformed into something far more glittering. The French, their minds already swimming with visions of Mexican and Peruvian empires, heard what they wanted to hear. The reddish metal quickly morphed from copper into gold. The stories of fur and timber were inflated into tales of cities rich with spices, jewels, and even a race of strange, blonde-haired, light-skinned natives who possessed this wealth. The legend took on a life of its own, a North American El Dorado shimmering just beyond the next set of rapids. Donnacona, perhaps seeing an opportunity to maintain his importance as a source of crucial information, seems to have leaned into the exaggeration, adding ever more fantastic details to keep the French engaged and reliant on him. The French obsession with finding this kingdom reached its peak with the disastrous expedition of Jean-François de la Roque, Sieur de Roberval, in 1542. King Francis I of France, determined not to be outdone by the Spanish, granted Roberval a commission to establish a colony in New France and, most importantly, to find the riches of Saguenay. Roberval's venture was a colossal undertaking and an even greater failure. He arrived with 3 ships carrying over 200 colonists, including convicts he had emptied from Parisian jails to serve as settlers. They built a small, miserable fort near present-day Quebec City and spent a brutal winter there, with dozens succumbing to scurvy and the bitter cold. In the spring, utterly desperate, Roberval led a party up the mighty Saguenay River itself, the presumed gateway to the kingdom. What they found was not a path to a golden city, but a breathtaking and terrifying landscape of deep, dark gorges, towering granite cliffs, and churning, impassable rapids. The river, flowing from the vast, barren expanse of the Canadian Shield, led only into a harsh wilderness of rock and pine, not to a metropolis of blonde-haired kings. The expedition was a complete disaster, and the colony was abandoned shortly after. The dream of a North American kingdom to rival the Aztecs died in the cold reality of the Canadian wilderness. Yet, like so many of these legends, the story of Saguenay was built upon a kernel of geographical and geological truth. The Saguenay River region is, in fact, incredibly rich, just not in the way the French had imagined. The dramatic Saguenay Graben, a massive geological rift valley, is indeed a treasure trove of mineral wealth. It contains some of the world's largest deposits of high-quality titanium, as well as significant resources of copper, nickel, and other industrial minerals. This was the real red gold the Stadaconans were likely alluding to. Furthermore, the blonde-haired natives of the stories may have been a distorted memory of actual encounters. The expansive trade networks of pre-contact North America were vast, and it is entirely possible that the Iroquois of the St. Lawrence had encountered or heard tales of the fairer-skinned Inuit peoples of the far north, or even of lighter-haired individuals from distant tribes, and woven them into their narratives. The Kingdom of Saguenay, therefore, stands as a perfect case study in how a genuine indigenous understanding of local geography and resources can be utterly transformed through the lens of a colonizer's preconceived desires. It was a myth that drove exploration, shaped early colonial policy, and ultimately found its truth not in cities of gold, but in the very real, rugged, and mineral-rich heart of the Canadian Shield, a kingdom of natural wealth that would only be unlocked by industry, not by conquest. Deep within the Mosquitia region of Honduras, a place so dense and untouched it's known as the place of no return, lies one of the most enduring legends of the Americas, La Ciudad Blanca, the White City. For centuries, this was the Central American El Dorado, a myth whispered among conquistadors and later pursued by explorers who ventured into one of the most impenetrable jungles on Earth. The stories spoke of a magnificent lost city, its buildings and monuments carved from gleaming white stone, a place of immense wealth abandoned to the vines and silence, guarded by deadly snakes and the spirits of its former inhabitants. This was no mere camp or village. It was described as a vast metropolis, a kingdom in its own right, often referred to by the tantalizing name, City of the Monkey God. While many wrote it off as just another jungle fable, the legend persisted, fueled by occasional, tantalizing reports from adventurers who claimed to have seen cliffs carved with strange figures or to have found mysterious stone artifacts in the dense undergrowth. The dramatic shift from myth to potential reality began in earnest with a figure straight out of an adventure novel, Theodore Maud. In 1940, the American explorer emerged from the Mosquitia jungle with an incredible story. He claimed to have found the ruins of the lost city and returned with thousands of artifacts as proof, along with a harrowing tale of being pursued by hostile indigenous people. Most sensationally, he reported that locals had told him the city was dedicated to a deity known as the Monkey God, and that a massive, buried statue of this simian figure lay hidden within the ruins. Tragically, Maud took the exact location of his discovery to his grave, dying before he could lead a return expedition, leaving his claims shrouded in mystery and skepticism. For decades, the White City remained an enigma, a ghost that countless others searched for, often at great personal risk, finding nothing but more jungle. The real breakthrough, the moment that transformed the search forever, came not from a machete-wielding explorer, but from the cool, analytical gaze of technology. In 2012, a team of documentary filmmakers and scientists, utilizing a revolutionary aerial mapping technology called LiDAR, made an astounding discovery. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, works by firing millions of laser pulses from an aircraft down through the forest canopy. These pulses bounce off the ground and any structures on it, and by measuring their return time, a computer can digitally strip away every single tree, vine, and bush, revealing a three-dimensional map of the bare earth below. When the team flew their LiDAR grid over a target valley in the Mosquitia, the results were breathtaking. The digital terrain model revealed not just one lone city, but the unmistakable evidence of a vast, unknown civilization. There were sprawling plazas, enormous earthworks, irrigation canals, reservoirs, and the ghostly outlines of pyramids and other structures, all laid out across the valley floor. The legend of a single white city had just been replaced by the reality of a lost kingdom. Guided by these LiDAR maps, a ground expedition finally reached the core of one of these sites in 2015. What they found was beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Instead of piles of rubble, they emerged into a clearing to find a breathtaking array of stone sculptures emerging from the moss and leaves, completely undisturbed for centuries. There were ceremonial seats known as metates, finely carved with intricate geometric and zoomorphic designs, and most astonishingly, a cache of over 500 objects left exactly where they had been placed when the city was abandoned. This was an archaeological time capsule of unparalleled significance. The centerpiece of the cache was the word jaguar effigy, a hauntingly beautiful stone vessel depicting a shaman in a trance state, transforming into a spirit jaguar. This single object spoke volumes about the spiritual life and artistic sophistication of the people who lived here. Contrary to the conquistadors' dreams, there was no gold. The real treasure was this pristine collection of art and ritual objects. providing an invaluable window into a culture that had vanished without a trace from the historical record. The ongoing work at this site, now popularly called the City of the Jaguar God, is rewriting the history of pre-Columbian Central America. This was not a peripheral outpost. It was a major, complex society that flourished in a region long thought to be too wild for large-scale settlement. Current archaeological evidence suggests this culture reached its peak around 1,000 years ago, around the year 1000 AD, and may have been part of a broader cultural sphere that extended into what is now Nicaragua and Costa Rica, distinct from the more well-known Maya to the west. The reason for its abandonment remains a mystery, though theories point to the same diseases like smallpox and measles that decimated other indigenous populations following European contact, diseases that would have raced along trade routes far ahead of the explorers themselves. The modern story of the White City is a powerful testament to how ancient legends, once dismissed as fantasy, are now being validated by cutting-edge science. It proves that the deep jungles of the world still hold profound secrets, and that the most valuable discoveries aren't always made of gold, but of knowledge, offering us a humbling reminder of how much of the human story is still waiting patiently to be found. But our journey doesn't end in the living jungles of the Americas. We now travel to a place where an entire world was not merely abandoned and reclaimed by nature, but was utterly extinguished in a single apocalyptic night, a kingdom so completely erased that its very existence was unknown for nearly 200 years. This is the story of the lost Tamboran civilization, a society that vanished not in the slow creep of legend, but in the most violent volcanic eruption in recorded human history. For centuries, the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia was known to the wider world for only one thing: the cataclysm of 1815. In April of that year, the volcano Mount Tambora exploded with a force that is almost incomprehensible. It was a volcanic explosivity index level 7 event, an eruption 10 times more powerful than Krakatoa and 100 times more powerful than Mount Vesuvius's destruction of Pompeii. The mountain literally blew itself apart, blasting over 30 cubic miles of rock and ash into the atmosphere. The sound was heard over 1,200 miles away, and the ensuing pyroclastic flows incinerated everything on the island. The immediate death toll was horrific, but the global consequences were even more profound. The immense volume of ash and sulfur dioxide particles launched into the stratosphere circled the globe, blocking sunlight and plunging the planet into a volcanic winter. The following year, 1816, became known as the Year Without a Summer. Crops failed across North America and Europe, causing widespread famine and food riots. This single event, half a world away, directly caused unseasonal frosts in June and snowfalls in July in New England. For almost 2 centuries, that was the entire story of Tambora, a geological monster that changed global climate. The idea that a sophisticated culture could have been living on its slopes was never seriously considered. The devastation was thought to be too absolute, the ash too deep. The kingdom was not lost to memory, it was lost to oblivion. Then, in 2004, a team of volcanologists and archaeologists led by Haraldur Sigurdsson began to dig. They were initially studying the eruption layers, but what they found just beneath the surface of the ash was nothing short of revolutionary. Using ground-penetrating radar, they identified buried structures. Then, with careful excavation, they began to uncover an entire world frozen in time. They had discovered the remains of the Tamboran kingdom, a civilization that had been completely unknown to history, preserved under nearly 10 feet of solidified ash and pyroclastic flow material. This was not a scattered village, it was a significant settlement with a distinct culture, now referred to as the Sangha culture. What they have unearthed since is a haunting and incredibly detailed window into a life instantly snuffed out. The ash entombed everything, creating a perfect cast of a lost world. Archaeologists found the carbonized remains of a house with 2 bodies inside. The position of the bodies and the evidence from the site suggest they were not killed by falling rock or ash, but by the searing hurricane-force wave of superheated gas and debris that raced down the mountain at the eruption's peak, a pyroclastic flow that instantly carbonized everything in its path. But within this tragedy, an extraordinary record was preserved. The team has recovered delicate ceramicware, finely worked bronze bowls, glass bottles, and iron tools. They found intricate glass beads, likely used in jewelry, and the carbonized remains of rice, peanuts, and bottles of probably fermented palm wine. Most remarkably, they uncovered a bronze ceremonial bowl with an ornate design, suggesting a society with skilled artisans and complex cultural rituals. The most poignant discovery, however, was a single, fragile piece of writing. On a scrap of bamboo, an unknown Tamboran had inscribed a few words in a script that is not Javanese, but appears to be a unique written language now lost. This single artifact is a heartbreaking testament to a people with their own history, stories, and identity, all of which perished with them. The evidence paints a picture of a prosperous and well-connected people. Their glassware and ceramics show trade links with Vietnam and Cambodia, while their style of betel nut cutters links them to other Indonesian islands. They were not an isolated tribe, they were a networked kingdom, living in the shadow of a giant they could not have known was about to awaken. The story of Tambora is uniquely powerful among lost kingdoms because its end is not wrapped in myth, but is a precisely documented historical event with global consequences. We know the exact day it ended, April 10, 1815. Its rediscovery is a stunning reminder that history is not always slowly forgotten. Sometimes it is catastrophically deleted. The Tamboran civilization represents the most literal definition of a lost kingdom, one that was not just abandoned or conquered, but physically obliterated and buried, its memory surviving only as a climate data point in Western history books. Its gradual excavation is one of the 21st century's most significant archaeological achievements, proving that even in the face of total annihilation, the traces of human culture endure, waiting patiently in the dark for their story to be told once more. But even the cataclysmic, singular fury of a volcano cannot erase a place as completely as the slow, patient, and utterly relentless hunger of the sea. For our next lost kingdom, we need travel no further than the eastern coast of England, to a stretch of shoreline in Suffolk where the waves whisper a different kind of elegy, not for a single night of fire, but for centuries of inexorable surrender. This is the story of Dunwich, a medieval metropolis that didn't vanish in a blink, but was slowly, bite by biting wave, consumed by the North Sea. To stand on the grassy cliffs that overlook the modern hamlet of Dunwich today is to gaze out upon a profound absence. The tranquil waters below and the shingle beach give no hint that they cover what was once one of the greatest ports in all of medieval England, a bustling, wealthy city that could genuinely rival London in its importance and power. In its 13th century prime, Dunwich was a thriving hub of the wool and textile trade, a member of the powerful confederation of ports known as the Cinque Ports, and a key base for the Royal Navy. It was a city of grand proportions, protected by thick walls and filled with the sounds of commerce and piety. It boasted at least 18 churches and chapels, including a magnificent monastery, a bustling marketplace, 2 hospitals for the sick and poor, and a guild hall that was the epicenter of its civic pride. Over 800 homes sheltered a population of several thousand souls, and its harbor was constantly filled with the masts of trading ships that connected England to the continent. This was no minor settlement. It was a powerhouse of medieval economics and a crucible of political influence. Its downfall was not a matter of divine punishment or moral failing, but a simple, brutal fact of geology and weather. The entire coastline here is composed of soft, unstable cliffs of sand and clay, a fragile frontier against the turbulent North Sea. A series of catastrophic storms in the 13th and 14th centuries, most notably the Great Storm of 1286, initiated a process of coastal erosion that would continue unabated for the next 700 years. Each mighty surge would carve great chunks out of the cliffs, sending buildings, streets, and entire churchyards tumbling into the churning water below. The townsfolk fought a desperate, heartbreaking rearguard action against the inevitable. They built sea defenses that were themselves washed away. They watched as, one by one, their proud landmarks were undermined and lost. All Saints' Church fell in the 1600s. The massive Greyfriars Monastery, a symbol of the city's wealth, succumbed to the waves in the early 1700s. The very last of Dunwich's original churches, St. Peter's, finally collapsed over the cliff edge in 1919, a final, symbolic surrender to the sea. The process was so gradual that it allowed for a slow, mournful exodus. As buildings on the eastern edge were lost, new ones were built further west, the entire town retreating in a slow, fighting retreat against an enemy that could not be defeated. Today, the Dunwich that remains is a quiet village of barely 100 residents, a tiny fragment of the vast city that once stood here, but the legacy of the old town is far from gone. It simply moved underwater. For generations, local fishermen have told stories of their nets snagging on unseen obstructions on the seafloor, and of occasionally hauling up medieval masonry or carved stone. These tales have been confirmed by modern science, transforming the waters off Dunwich into one of Britain's most fascinating underwater archaeological sites. Using advanced sonar and seismic mapping technology, marine archaeologists have been able to create a stunningly detailed map of the drowned cityscape. The scans reveal the ghostly outlines of streets, foundations, and the distinct shapes of ruined churches lying in the murky depths. Divers exploring the site have recovered a poignant collection of artifacts that speak to the daily life that was lost: medieval pottery, stone coffins, and even the remains of the harbor walls that once protected a fleet of ships. Every new storm that buffets this coast still scours the seabed, sometimes revealing yet another piece of the puzzle, another fragment of a world that was slowly stolen by the sea. The story of Dunwich is perhaps the most relatable of all our lost kingdoms because its enemy is one we all understand: time, and the slow, unstoppable change it brings. There was no single moment of dramatic collapse, no army at the gates or volcanic explosion. There was only the constant, grinding work of the tide, the wind, and the waves, a force of nature that demanded tribute year after year, century after century, until an entire city had been paid. It stands as a powerful and haunting reminder of the fragility of our own coastal communities in an age of rising sea levels, a real-world parable written not in myth, but in the very real soil and stone that still slips bit by bit into the hungry grey water. Yet even as we chart the sunken streets of Dunwich with sonar and satellites, some lost kingdoms remain stubbornly elusive, their locations hidden not by water or ash, but by the passage of millennia and the ambiguity of ancient texts. This brings us to a land defined not by its dramatic end, but by its incredible wealth and its profound mystery, the lost kingdom of Tarshish. In the Hebrew Bible, Tarshish is described with a sense of awe and immense distance. It was the far end of the known world, a place so remote that simply getting there was an epic voyage. The most famous reference comes from the book of Jonah, where the prophet, fleeing his divine mission, books passage on a ship bound for Tarshish, heading in the exact opposite direction of where God told him to go. This single detail tells us volumes. Tarshish was the ultimate destination for those seeking to escape, a place synonymous with remoteness and self-imposed exile. But its primary identity in the ancient world was that of a trading powerhouse. The books of Kings and Chronicles describe how King Solomon, in his legendary partnership with the Phoenician King Hiram of Tyre, assembled a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber on the Red Sea. These ships, manned by Phoenician sailors who knew the sea routes, would voyage to Tarshish and return every 3 years, their holds bursting with almost unimaginable wealth: gold, silver, ivory, precious stones, and exotic animals like apes and peacocks. This was not a minor trading outpost. Tarshish was a source of the raw materials that built Solomon's temple and cemented his reputation as the wealthiest monarch of his age. The very name became so associated with maritime commerce that later biblical writers began using ships of Tarshish as a generic term for any large ocean-going vessel capable of a long haul, much like we might say tanker ships or container ships today. The mystery lies in the fact that while the Bible gushes about what came from Tarshish, it remains frustratingly silent on where Tarshish actually was. This silence has launched a centuries-long scholarly detective story with theories for its location spanning the entire breadth of the ancient world. The most prominent and long-standing candidate is the southern Iberian Peninsula in the region of modern-day Spain. Here, the evidence is compellingly rooted in geology and archaeology. The ancient city of Tartessos, which flourished in the Guadalquivir River Valley in what is now Andalusia, was a real, wealthy metal trading civilization that had strong links with the Phoenicians. The region was famous in antiquity for its rich mines of silver, lead, and tin, exactly the kind of resources the Bible says Solomon imported. The names Tartessos and Tarshish are also strikingly similar, suggesting they could be different pronunciations or transcriptions of the same root word. Furthermore, the Phoenicians established a major colony at nearby Cadiz, making this entire area a logical terminus for their vast Mediterranean and Atlantic trade networks. For many historians, the case for Tartessos is the strongest, but the Iberian theory is far from the only contender. Another compelling argument points to the island of Sardinia. Here, the evidence is not just in name, but in cold, hard metal. Archaeologists on Sardinia have discovered massive hoards of metal ingots, particularly from the Nuragic civilization that thrived there in the Bronze Age. Most significantly, they have found countless pieces of ore and processed metal inscribed with the word Tarshish in Phoenician script. This is not a matter of similar-sounding names. This is a direct physical inscription linking the island's mineral wealth to the name itself. It suggests that Tarshish may not have referred to a single city or kingdom at all, but rather to a type of smelting and refining operation or a specific kind of ore. In this reading, a ship of Tarshish might have been a vessel specifically designed to carry this heavy, valuable mineral cargo from Sardinia or other mining regions back to the Levant. Just when the debate seems settled between the Western Mediterranean options, even more distant possibilities emerge, pushing the boundaries of ancient travel to their absolute limits. Some scholars, noting the exotic goods like ivory, apes, and peacocks, all animals native to the Indian subcontinent, have proposed that Tarshish was actually in India, perhaps a port on the Malabar coast. This theory posits that the Phoenician and Israelite sailors were part of a vast, indirect trade network that connected the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, with goods being passed along through many middlemen. An even more audacious theory, based on a different translation of the biblical word for ivory, suggests Tarshish could refer to Tarsus in Cilicia in modern-day Turkey, though this seems too close to home to fit the description of a distant, almost mythical land. The sheer range of these proposals, from Spain to Sardinia to India, highlights the core of the problem. The mystery of Tarshish is the ultimate example of the difficulty in pinning down ancient trading partners mentioned in historical texts. A name that was once crystal clear to a Phoenician sea captain 2,800 years ago has become a Rorschach test on the map, with each new piece of archaeological evidence seeming to point in a different direction. It represents the fundamental challenge historians face. A single word in an ancient text can carry a world of meaning that is completely lost to us, leaving us to piece together its location from fragments of pottery, scattered inscriptions, and the enduring, silent testimony of sunken shipwrecks yet to be found. While some lost kingdoms faded into myth and others were erased by cataclysm, one city's disappearance was so complete that it wasn't just forgotten by history, it was entirely hidden from it, lying in plain sight for millennia just beneath the surface of the sea. This brings us to perhaps the most perfectly preserved time capsule of early urban life ever discovered, a place that redefines our understanding of the Bronze Age, the sunken city of Pavloptri, nestled in the shallow, turquoise waters off the southern coast of the Peloponnese in Greece. What makes Pavloptri so extraordinary, so different from the myth-shrouded realms of Atlantis or Lyonesse, is its stunning reality. This is not a legend. It is a sprawling, tangible archaeological site, a complete town plan frozen in time, and it holds the incredible distinction of being the oldest known submerged city on our planet, dating back an almost unimaginable 5,000 years. The story of its modern rediscovery reads like a serendipitous detective novel. In 1967, a renowned oceanographer named Nicholas Fleming was surveying the coastline from a small boat when he noticed something strange beneath the crystal-clear water. The outlines of walls, the shapes of buildings, the geometry of streets, all were clearly visible on the seafloor. He alerted archaeologists, and initial dives confirmed his incredible hunch. This was a major Bronze Age settlement miraculously preserved. For decades, it was studied periodically, but it wasn't until 2009 that a full-scale, cutting-edge underwater archaeological project led by Dr. John Henderson from the University of Nottingham, in collaboration with the Greek Ephorate of Underwater Antiquities, began to reveal the site's true grandeur. Using sophisticated technology like underwater sonar mapping and precision GPS, the team didn't just find a few scattered ruins, they mapped an entire lost world. The city covers an area of over 9 acres and boasts an almost complete urban plan, a rare and precious find for any archaeologist, let alone one working entirely beneath the waves. We can see its main streets still following their original routes, intersecting with narrower alleys. We can identify the foundations of at least 15 large multi-room buildings, a clearly defined town square or central megaron, and 2 monumental stone tombs known as cist graves. There is even evidence of a complex water management system, including channels and pipes, showing a remarkable level of civic planning. The key to this incredible preservation was not a sudden, Atlantis-like catastrophe, but a slower geological process. The entire region is seismically active, sitting on a web of fault lines. Evidence suggests that a series of gradual earthquakes over centuries caused the land to subside, slowly lowering the city into the embrace of the sea. This gentle, incremental sinking is what saved Pavloptri. Unlike cities destroyed by volcanic ash or violent tsunamis, there was no violent destruction here. The buildings were not toppled, they were simply inundated. The sand and sediment of the seafloor settled over them, creating a protective layer that shielded the ruins from erosion and human interference for thousands of years. It's as if the city was carefully placed in a museum display case, and the water was gently poured over the top. This pristine condition has given archaeologists an unprecedented window into the daily rhythms of life in the early Bronze Age, a period from which almost no other complete urban sites survive. From the artifacts carefully recovered from the seabed, a vivid picture emerges of a sophisticated, prosperous, and well-connected community. The sheer quantity of pottery found is staggering. Thousands of fragments from large storage jars called pithoi, used for holding oil, wine, and grain, indicating a stable agricultural surplus and complex trade. The pottery styles themselves tell a story of far-reaching connections. Archaeologists found fragments from Minoan Crete, suggesting Pavloptri was a key trading port in a network that linked mainland Greece with the advanced Minoan civilization and beyond. They also uncovered stone tools for weaving and cloth production, indicating a robust local textile industry. But perhaps the most human finds are the simple, everyday objects, stone mortars and pestles for grinding grain, giving us a direct sensory link to the people who prepared their meals here 5 millennia ago. The most telling discovery, however, lies in the harbor itself. the underwater surveys revealed over 40 large, flat stone slabs that had been carefully drilled with holes. These are the missing anchors of the ships that once tied up here, the physical proof of Pavloptri's lifeblood, maritime trade. This was not an isolated village. It was a bustling, cosmopolitan port, a place where goods and ideas from across the Aegean were exchanged. The city's layout, with buildings clustered around a central courtyard and organized along clearly defined streets, shows a surprising level of social organization and urban planning far earlier than previously thought possible in this region. Pavloptri forces us to completely rethink the complexity of early Helladic society. It shows us that 5,000 years ago, people were not just living in simple villages. They were building planned towns, engaging in long-distance sea trade, and creating a vibrant urban culture on the shores of the Mediterranean. Its silent, sunken streets are not a memorial to a disaster, but a perfectly preserved snapshot of a thriving world, offering us a clearer, more intimate glimpse into our distant past than any legend ever could. From the sunken, perfectly preserved streets of Pavloptri, we now voyage to a lost kingdom of an entirely different scale, not a city or even a country, but an entire continent that has been hiding in plain sight, submerged beneath the waves for millions of years. This brings us to our final lost kingdom, one that is not a matter of myth or legend, but of hard, irrefutable geological fact, the lost continent of Zealandia. Imagine a landmass nearly half the size of Australia, a vast plateau of continental crust stretching over 1.9 million square miles. Now imagine that 94% of it is underwater, with only its highest mountain peaks piercing the surface to form the islands of New Zealand and a few tiny outlying archipelagos. This is Zealandia, or Te Reo Moi in Maori, a continent that has been formally recognized by the global geological community only since 2017. Its story is not one of a sudden cataclysm, but of a slow, epic drama of plate tectonics that unfolded over the last 60 million years. Zealandia began its life as part of the supercontinent Gondwana, fused to the eastern flank of what is now Australia and nestled against Antarctica. Then, around 85 million years ago, the massive tectonic forces deep within the Earth began to pull it apart. A rift formed, and Zealandia started to drift away, thinning and stretching as it went. This stretching caused the continental crust to sink, and over millennia, the relentless ocean poured in, until all that remained above water were the alpine summits of New Zealand's Southern Alps and the volcanic peaks of the North Island. This was not a rapid drowning, but a gradual geological sigh, a continent becoming a seabed. The profound question this raises is whether the human memory of this event could possibly have survived. While Zealandia's full submersion occurred long before humans walked the Earth, the Maori people of New Zealand have powerful oral traditions that speak of lost lands. One of the most significant is the legend of Moi, the great trickster demigod, who is said to have fished the North Island of New Zealand, or Te Ika e Moi, from the depths of the ocean. Some interpretations of these stories suggest they could be metaphorical memories of a time when the land was more extensive, or of dramatic post-glacial sea level rises that occurred within the last 10,000 years, which would have inundated coastal plains and isolated islands. The Maori word for land that has slipped into the sea is Wenua Ho, and stories tell of canoes that once paddled to now vanished islands, of ancestral pathways that are now submerged. While these traditions cannot be direct recollections of Zealandia's initial sinking, they may very well be cultural echoes of a more recent and dynamic relationship with a changing coastline, a landscape that has always been in flux, where the sea is a constant, powerful force that both gives and takes away. The confirmation of Zealandia's continental status is far more than just a fascinating cartographical update. It fundamentally rewrites the geological history of our planet. Continents were once thought to be largely immutable, but Zealandia proves they can be stretched, thinned, and drowned without breaking apart or losing their geological identity. It acts as a crucial missing link, helping scientists understand the final breakup of Gondwana and the complex ballet of tectonic plates in the southern Pacific. Its existence challenges our very definition of what a continent is, pushing us to think beyond what is simply dry land and to consider the hidden, submerged foundations of our world. This submerged world also opens up thrilling new frontiers for understanding human history. If Zealandia was once more extensive, even in the relatively recent past during the last ice age when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, it could have created a vast habitable platform. This raises the tantalizing possibility that it was a stepping stone for the very first human migration into the Pacific. The traditional narrative holds that Polynesians sailed directly across vast, empty ocean to reach New Zealand around 700 years ago. But what if earlier, unknown groups of explorers, perhaps from Melanesia or even Southeast Asia, found their way to a larger, more accessible Zealandia thousands of years earlier? The submerged coastlines and river valleys of this lost continent could potentially hide archaeological sites that would completely revolutionize our models of Pacific settlement. Finding such evidence is the monumental task of a new field of science, underwater archaeology. Researchers are now using advanced sonar to map these sunken landscapes, creating detailed topographical maps of a lost world of plains, hills, and river systems that have been drowned for millennia. They are looking for the telltale signs of human presence: charcoal from ancient fires, stone tools, or the altered shells of middens that could rewrite the story of human courage and exploration. Zealandia, therefore, is a kingdom with a dual legacy. It is a colossal chapter in Earth's deep history, and it may also be the keeper of secrets from our own human past, a silent, sunken witness to journeys we never knew were taken. From the sunken avenues of Pavloptri to the continental expanse of Zealandia, our journey across these 25 lost kingdoms reveals something profound about the human spirit itself. We are, it seems, eternal storytellers and seekers, driven by a deep need to explain the mysteries of our world and our past. Whether it's a philosophical allegory like Atlantis, a cautionary tale of hubris like Wise, a spiritual sanctuary like Shambhala, or a desperate hope for an ally like Prester John, these legends are far more than mere fiction. They are the vessels into which we pour our greatest fears, our deepest longings, and our most pressing questions about civilization's fragility and the relentless passage of time. They emerge from the very real evidence our ancestors witnessed: the petrified forests off the coast of Wales, the sunken harbors of Vinter, the sudden collapse of a city into a desert sinkhole, and they provide a narrative framework to make sense of the inexplicable, transforming geological processes and historical tragedies into memorable, moral-driven sagas. What is truly breathtaking about our modern era is that we are living in a golden age of rediscovery, where technology is acting as a key to unlock these ancient stories. The same human ingenuity that once spun these tales is now providing the tools to investigate them. LiDAR laser scanning is peeling back the jungle canopy to reveal the ghostly outlines of vast settlements in the Amazon and Honduras, just as marine archaeologists use sonar to map the drowned streets of Dunwich and Pavloptri. Satellite imagery guides us to desert oases and lost trade routes, while genetic analysis and plate tectonics offer scientific explanations for the migration of lemurs and the drowning of entire continents, replacing myth with understanding. The line between legend and history is becoming increasingly blurred, not to erase the magic of these stories, but to deepen our appreciation for them. We are learning that a legend is rarely a lie. More often, it is a truth wrapped in the poetry of time, waiting for its moment to be revealed. This incredible journey through fallen empires and sunken cities belongs to all of us. It's a shared inheritance of wonder, so we'd love to hear from you. Which of these lost kingdoms captures your imagination the most? Is it the philosophical mystery of Atlantis, the golden mirage of El Dorado, the spiritual promise of Shangri-La, or the modern-day discovery of a place like the White City? Let us know in the comments below what fascinates you about these vanished worlds. And if you're hungry for more adventures into the deepest mysteries of our past, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the shadows of history. The map is still covered in blank spaces, and every one of them holds a story waiting